The Grace Glitch. Dr. Sheila T. Hodge-Wendover. Copyright 2025 by Drive Sheila Hodge-Wendover. P.O. Box 7990. Lawton, Oklahoma 73506. www.drhodgewendover.com. All rights reserved. No part of this publication may be reproduced, distributed, or transmitted in any form or by any means, including photocopying, recording, or other electronic or mechanical methods, without the prior written permission of the publisher, except in the case of brief quotations embodied in critical reviews and certain other non-commercial uses permitted by copyright law. www.drhodgewendover.com. This book is dedicated to my niece, Karis Morton. Acknowledgements. To the one who authors our lives before we ever put pen to paper, all glory and honor be to God, my heavenly Father. This book was a divine whisper, a story placed on my heart that I was simply privileged to write down. It stands as a testament to his endless grace. Some stories are a joy to tell. Others are a sacred responsibility. The memory of my beloved sister, Grace, is both. Her light was brilliant, and her story, one of immense love and a tragic farewell, forms the heart of this book. I am eternally grateful to my sister, Deborah Thompson, for walking with me back through the halls of memory, helping me piece together the beautiful, fleeting moments of Grace's life with such clarity and love. A special thanks also to my brother-in-law, Reginald Morton, who graciously opened his heart and shared part of the tender love story that he and Grace built together, a story that makes its culmination all the more profound. I must also extend my gratitude to the visionary mentors who saw a writer lurking within me long before I ever dared to believe it. Delcia King Bradley, the brilliant Jedediah Blake, who specifically jogged my memory for the Code Blue in the Pew story, thank you, and Dr. James W. Sutton. You nurtured that seed with unwavering belief, and for that, I am forever changed. No writer can journey alone. My deepest thanks go to my steadfast support team, my early readers and cherished friends who championed this project from its earliest, roughest drafts: Deborah Thompson, Marita Tyrell Mitchell, Diana Francis, Athel Davis, Denise Metsimila, Billy Troy, Shanti Hubbard, and Winston Thompson. Your feedback was invaluable, but your encouragement was the wind in my sails. This manuscript was honed and polished with the expert guidance of Dr. Steve Watts, and I am profoundly thankful for his skillful eye and willingness to edit. To all of you named here, and to the many whose paths have blessed my own, you have been God's hands and feet on this journey. I carry a piece of each of you in these pages. And to you, the reader, as you turn the page, prepare to meet a woman whose spirit defied the limits of her time. This is the true story of Grace, her laughter, her love, and the legacy that echoes long after her final goodbye. Her story is one you will not soon forget. Table of Contents.
Chapter 1: A Life of Quiet Strength and Real Love 8. Chapter TWO: The Day the Sidewalk Bit Back 10. Chapter 3: Fortland 16. Chapter 4: The Perfect Lie 28. Chapter 5: The Princess and Her Books 38. Chapter 6: Spirituality 42. Chapter 7: After High School 46. Chapter 8: Creativity and Resourcefulness 53. Chapter 9: Health and Wellness 59. Chapter 10: Code Blue in the Pew 63. Chapter 11: The Unshakable Nurse 66. Chapter 12: Romantic Relationship 69. Chapter 13: August 1st, 1991 75. Chapter 14: It Should Have Been Me 89. Chapter 15: Between Miracle and Mystery 94. Chapter 16: Bonding with My Younger Sister 101. Chapter 17, A Glitch in the World, 110. Chapter 18, Proving Grace Wrong, 119. Chapter 19, The Name, 124. Appendix 1, 134. Appendix 2, 141.
Introduction. What if the brightest light in your life, one color you loved, the very songs you sang together, could transform into a trigger, a weapon of memory? My world was shattered not with a bang, but with the silence that followed my sister Grace's laughter. In the aftermath, I was haunted by a question I was too terrified to voice. Did God make a mistake? I armored myself in anger, building walls against a grief that hid in the chords of a familiar hymn, waiting to ambush me. But the universe had a different plan. A chance encounter, a haunting melody in a quiet church, and an inescapable assignment forced me to turn and face the storm I had spent a lifetime fleeing. This is the story of unraveling my own sorrow, of discovering that true strength is not found in remaining unbroken, but in being forged from the pieces. I learned that love is the most powerful code, and the love I carry for Grace is no ghost. It is part of my guide, the unbreakable light that will lead me through the deepest darkness. Her story didn't end, it simply unlocked a new level. Chapter 1, A Life of Quiet Strength and Real Love. Let's talk about my late older sister, Grace. She wasn't the loudest person in the room, but oh, did you feel it when she was there? She had this calm, powerful energy that just made everything feel okay. She was the definition of her name, full of grace. But don't get it twisted, her quietness wasn't weakness. It was a deep, steady strength. She was the person you could go to with a problem, and she would not even need to say much to make you feel a ton lighter. She just had this way of listening that made you feel truly heard. Life wasn't always easy for her. She had been hurt before by watching men disappoint our mother, and that pain was a part of her. It made her real. It showed that even the strongest people carry scars, but they don't let that stop them from being kind or progressing in life. She had her favorite people. She loved kicking it with older folks, soaking up their stories and wisdom like it was the most interesting podcast ever. And kids? They absolutely adored her. She gave them her full attention, making them feel like the most important people in the world. She found magic in the simple things of life, like drinking sarsop bush tea every evening or going for a walk and noticing how beautiful the world is and giving thanks for it. Her faith was her anchor. It was her main source of power, and it motivated her to be of service to others. It was how she made sense of the world. She saw tough times not as random disasters, but as chances to learn and grow stronger. And oh, how resilient she was. She faced challenges that would have totally broken other people, yet she handled them with such dignity. She taught our younger siblings and me that we could get through anything. She showed us that challenges are basically just upgrades for your character. Based on the foregoing, this isn't a goodbye to Grace. How do you say goodbye to someone whose vibes are literally woven into your own? Her legacy is everywhere, in the wind, in the sunlight through the trees, and in our interpersonal relations, particularly in the way we try to be kinder to each other. She lived a life of genuine love and quiet strength, and that's something worth remembering. Her story is a reminder that we need to find beauty in this complicated journey of life we're all on. Chapter 2, The Day the Sidewalk Bit Back. One of my oldest memories is burned into my mind like a movie scene. I was maybe 3 or 4, and my sister Grace, my entire world at that time, decided to take me on a grand expedition around Haynes Smith Village. To my tiny eyes, it was a vast and mysterious kingdom, and Grace was my fearless guide. She narrated our tour with the gravity of a historian, pointing out the landmarks of our community. She showed me the low-slung, utilitarian building, the public baths. On one side, the women's, on the other, the men's. This was where our neighbors, whose homes had no running water, would come to shower. My young mind couldn't yet grasp the hardship that necessitated them. I only saw them as places of strange and solemn ritual. Nearby stood the public standpipe, a lone metal spigot rising from the concrete, where people would line up with buckets and jugs to catch water for drinking and cooking, whether their homes were never connected or their service had been cut off. It was the lifeline for those living on the edge. I was utterly absorbed, my head swiveling between the bathhouses and the water line, staring at the cracked concrete beneath my feet and the weary shapes of the buildings. I was not watching where I was going. I was learning the unspoken map of our world, a geography of need and resilience, guided by my sister's voice. And then it happened. 1 second, I was taking a clumsy step forward. Next, the sidewalk bit back, with a sharp, shocking crunch. I immediately froze as a searing, electric pain shot up my leg. I looked down, and my stomach felt queasy at once. Hidden in the dust was a broken soda bottle, its glass teeth sunk deep into my foot. For a heartbeat, there was nothing. Then, the blood came. It wasn't a trickle, it was a dark red flood, spilling onto the hot sidewalk. The world seemed to go silent except for the frantic beating of my own heart. I opened my mouth to scream, but only a choked gasp came out. Before the full force of the panic could swallow me whole, Grace was there. She did not gasp. She did not freeze. In a single, fluid motion, she swooped down and scooped me up. Her arms were instantly a fortress, pulling me tight against her. The fear was still there, throbbing in time with the pain in my foot, but held against her, hearing her steady breathing, I knew the worst was over. She had me. My big sister had me, and that was all that mattered. The stitches. The blur of getting to the hospital is an adrenaline-fueled montage in my memory. But the next part? That's crystal clear. Because our mom worked as a maid at the only hospital in the city, the Joseph N. France General Hospital, she was there in a flash. The 10-minute walk from Haynes Smith Village felt instantaneous, a panicked blur that ended with her bursting into the emergency room. Her professional maid's uniform suddenly doubled as a nurse's resolve. Still, I could see the raw panic screaming in her eyes. That's when things got real. They laid me down on a cold, hard table. The room was too bright, with all its sharp edges and the sterile, antiseptic smell that clung to my mother's clothes every day when she came home. And then the nurses began their stitching. There was no numbing shot, no magic spray to take the edge off. Nothing. Just the cold, sharp bite of the needle as it pierced my skin for the first stitch. I screamed. Not a cry, but a raw, primal scream from a place I didn't know existed. My body went rigid, then thrashed on its own, my legs kicking out against the blinding waves of pain. Every single pull of the thread was a fresh fire, a searing tug that felt like it would never end. I was trapped in a tiny room of agony. My own cries echoed back at me, mocking me. But through the tears that blurred my vision, I saw them, my mom, holding my hand, her voice steady, forced calm telling me to be brave, and Grace, my fierce, strong Grace. She wasn't just watching, she was hurting with me. Her face was pale, etched with deep sadness every time I jerked and screamed. The needle seared through my skin. She looked like she wished more than anything she could take the pain for me. In that chaotic, horrible moment, Grace and my mom were my anchor together. Their whispers of encouragement were the only thing tethering me to reality, a lifeline thrown into a stormy sea. Later, at home, when the throbbing finally dulled to an ache, Grace was there. Her voice was soft, but her words were strong. I believe she told me I was a warrior and so brave. Sitting there on my bed, exhausted and tear-streaked, I finally understood. This wasn't just a bad day. It was a core memory. Grace's quick thinking got me to safety, but her presence in that hellish room was what truly saved me. She showed me that real strength was not about being pain-free, but about facing pain head-on, with someone you love holding your hand. That day, she didn't just help to wipe away my tears. She showed me the raw power of compassion. It was a lesson forged in fire and stitches, one that I would carry for the rest of my life. She taught me how to be strong. The Tooth Fairy Pact. It started with a tiny wiggling door in my mouth. I was 5, and my front tooth had gone from a solid part of me to a strange, shaky little tile I could worry with my tongue. The feeling was equal parts fascinating and terrifying. What if it fell out while I was eating and I swallowed it? What if the new one never grew back? My 5-year-old mind was consumed by its impending departure. That's when Grace, my oracle of all things, stepped in. She inspected the tooth with the grave authority of an expert, her brow furrowed. "It's hanging by a thread," she declared. "We have to help it." Her solution was both brilliant and terrifying. I believe that she tied one end of a short piece of sewing thread to the tooth and the other to our bedroom doorknob. My heart was a frantic bird in my chest. This is how grown-ups do it, I thought. They must know a secret way that doesn't hurt. But before she could even touch the door, a sudden, nervous jerk of my own head was all it took. There was a quick, sharp pop, more surprise than pain, and the tiny white pearl was free, resting in my palm. I stared at it, awestruck. The mystery had become real. The wiggling was gone, replaced by a smooth, bloody gap that felt enormous to my tongue. That night, our shared bedroom felt different. The shadows, usually just shapes, seemed to hold their breath. Grace, still riding the high of her successful dental operation, leaned close with a conspirator's whisper. She told me about the tooth fairy and instructed me to put my tooth underneath the pillow. She explained that the tooth fairy traded lost teeth for cold, hard cash. Her words weren't just a story. They were a secret, a mission. My imagination, now a fertile ground for magic, didn't picture some sparkly princess. It conjured something far more eerie, a silent, shimmering form gliding on moonbeams, slipping through our window unseen. The plan was set. With a mix of thrills and pure dread, I placed my tiny tooth under my pillow, like a church offering. What if she doesn't come? A small voice in my head whispered, "What if only kids with really clean teeth get money? What if she gets lost?" This wasn't just hope. This was a test of the entire universe, all on Grace's word. I spent that night staring into the darkness, every creak in the house, heard or imagined, making me jump. Was that the wind? Or the soft rustle of wings? The anticipation was a live wire, buzzing under my skin. I was a tiny conspirator in a game with magic, waiting for a sign that the unbelievable was real. All because Grace, who had already performed one miracle that day, said it was. The waiting game. The first night, I barely slept. Every sound was a potential signal that the tooth fairy was actually coming, but it kept me awake. The second night, the excitement began to curdle into something else stout. By the third sunrise, a cold, heavy stone of disappointment settled in my gut. I scrambled out of bed each morning with my heart thumping, only to find the same stupid tooth staring back at me. It wasn't a treasure anymore, it was a taunt. Where was she? The magic figure Grace had so vividly described now felt like a lie, a cruel ghost story. My hope, which had once felt so electric, now just felt stupid. Each day that passed was another crack in the foundation of my belief, shattering it completely. I started side-eyeing Grace. Her laughter, which once sounded like certainty, now felt like a trick. Why would she set me up for a fall like this? Why make me believe in something so fragile? The weight of that letdown was heavier than any coin could have been. But in the quiet wreckage of that childhood dream, I stumbled onto a harder, truer magic. The real treasure wasn't some fairy's cash. It was the blinding, all-consuming belief itself, the sheer force of hope that could make you stare into the darkness for nights on end, convinced something miraculous was coming. That light, even when it's snuffed out, shows you what you're made of. It teaches you that the world can be a letdown. But the wonder, the ability to even hope for something magical, that's yours to keep. And that's a different kind of power altogether. Chapter 3, Fortlands. When I was about 5 and a half, we moved from Haynes Smith Village to Trafalgar Village, and the very air of our world changed. It became thick with secrets and the salt tang of the sea. Our new home was just north of the children's home, a stone's throw from the wild, untamed stretch of coast we called Fortlands. Long before the crowds and noise of Fisherman's Wharf moved in, this place was ours, a black sand beach where the wind didn't whisper, it hissed. The view around Fortlands was breathtaking. To the south stood the two sentinels of luxury and escape, the Grand Fort Thomas Hotel and the elegant OT1 Hotel, both immensely popular in those days. They stood atop the cliffs, their balconies overlooking a clear, blue ocean that stretched into the distance. We lived about a 10-minute walk from the Limekill Bay, where the rhythm of life was set by fishermen hauling in their catch and the joyful shouts of daily swimmers. It was a world of stark contrasts between the curated luxury of the hotels and the raw, elemental beauty we children claimed as our own. During our school vacation breaks, Grace and I would trek across the sun-baked sand, but it wasn't just a walk. It felt like a mission. The old fort watched us, silent and crumbling, like a giant hiding its past. Every tide pool wasn't just water. It was a hidden world, a trapdoor to something more profound. You have expected something to dart out from the dark rocks, or to see a shadow move where no shadow should be. Our laughter would slice through the heavy silence. Still, it felt brave, not carefree, a challenge to whatever watched us from the deep water or behind the rusted ruins. The salty air didn't just smell like clean ocean breeze. It smelled like stories, old stories, and forgotten ones. With every step we took, the sand sucked at our slippers as if it wanted to pull us under. Grace led the way, her eyes scanning the horizon not for beauty, but for clues. This wasn't just some sunny day adventure. It felt like we were on the edge of a mystery, one that the tide was about to turn and reveal. Grace always took the lead, a force of nature with that curtain of long, dark hair flowing behind her like a banner. She would grab my hand, her grip firm and sure, and pull me forward with a contagious energy that felt more like a mission than a stroll. Every trip we made to Fortlands shore typically brought the same sort of excitement and anticipation. "Come on," she would say, her voice cutting through the roar of the waves. Not a melody, but a command. "The sea's hiding something today. Let's find it." We would push further, past where most people would turn back. In those days, it felt wild and untamed. The breeze there didn't just greet you, it pushed against you, like it was guarding secrets. The water didn't just sparkle, it glittered, sharp and dangerous, like a million shattered mirrors. We would scan the shoreline, not just looking, but hunting. We were eager for whatever the tide had to cough up. Then breathlessly, Grace's voice would slice the air here. "Now." And I would sprint to where she was already kneeling, her focus absolute. She would point into the murky water of a tide pool, a tiny, contained universe. And there they were, not just whelks and crabs, but armored creatures moving in a jerky, alien ballet. They weren't just living jewels, they were ancient and strange, glinting like wet metal in the dim light, which made us wonder what else was hiding just beneath the surface. It felt like Grace's eyes would lock onto the water, intense and unblinking. "Look closer," she would whisper, her voice dropping so low I had to lean in. "Don't just see the shells. Look at what they're hiding." In my mind, her finger would hover above the surface, tracing the frantic paths of the crabs. "See how they move? It's a code. They know something we don't." She made it feel like we weren't just kids on a beach. We were investigators on the verge of a breakthrough, deciphering the ocean's cryptic messages. It also seemed as if, once, she went silent for a full minute, watching a hermit crab trade its shell for a newer, deadlier looking one. It's upgrading, she finally said, her voice full of grim respect. They're always getting ready for something, for whatever comes next. Grace would then lift her gaze from the micro world to the vast, gray expanse of the open sea. The real treasure isn't what the tide brings in, she would confide, her earlier excitement hardening into something more serious. It's what it's trying to keep, the stuff that only comes out during the biggest storms. She made every shell feel like a clue, and every piece of sea glass a fragment of a larger, more mysterious story we were piecing together. And in those moments, with the wind whipping her hair and the cold water soaking our shoes, I wasn't just following my sister. I was following a detective, a pirate, a prophet, all rolled into one. And I believed every word that she declared. One Easter Monday, a well-anticipated holiday in our country, Grace and I indulged in the annual Bayfront tradition. This holiday brought with it a sense of joy, of history woven into the very fabric of our town. Irish Town Bayfront transformed into a hub of excitement, and we were swept along with the tide of exuberance as our thirst for adventure wrapped itself in the playful chaos of laughter. Families gathered, jubilant and energetic, eager to witness the spectacle of the greasy lamp post, a long, shining log reaching out into the sea, adorned with a succulent ham that dangled like a most tantalizing prize. The air buzzed with anticipation and camaraderie, a pulse that thrummed through the crowd as participants encouraged one another, all vying for a piece of glory atop a slippery perch. One by one, the valiant men stepped forward, a kaleidoscope of humanity in their casual attire, each adorned with determination, each eager for victory, but oblivious of the absurd theatricality that awaited them. The laughter was infectious as they slipped and fell, their dreams of ham deflated in the splash of warm water. And with every splash, the crowd erupted with laughter. It wasn't just laughter, it was a roaring, shared release. We weren't just watching men compete for a meal. We were witnessing a raw, hilarious battle for glory, a moment of pure, unscripted theater that bonded us all. Then a hush fell. The crowd's energy shifted, coalescing around one man. He moved differently, with a focused grace that defied the grease. Hand over hand, he inched forward, a quiet master against the chaotic failures. He wasn't just climbing, he was conquering. The ham was within his reach. He grabbed it. A victorious shout started to form in our throats. But the pole had one last trick. In the very moment of his triumph, it betrayed him. His feet shot out from under him, and he fell, not with a flailing splash, but with a heavy, definitive plunge into the sea. The crowd gasped, and then we saw it. As he surfaced, wiping the water from his face, he wasn't scowling. He was grinning a wide, brilliant flash of white in his wet face. It wasn't a smile of defeat, but of shared understanding. He held the ham aloft, a dripping champion who had won his prize only to be immediately dethroned. He hadn't just won a ham, he had given us the best story of the day. The University Center. Across the road from the cenotaph, World Wars I and II Memorial, another world lay. It wasn't just a university center for citizens to use for higher educational pursuits. It was an uncharted territory, a jungle of possibilities. However, Grace and I were its only explorers. We vanished under the thickets of almond trees hanging over the street, the air thick and buzzing with secrets. The trees weren't just vibrant, they were ancient giants guarding their treasure. Not only did the leaves dance, but they whispered, taunting us, daring us to try to take what was theirs. We were our own army, armed with rocks and fierce determination. We launched our ammunition, the thwack of stone against wood, cracking through the quiet like a gunshot. Every hit was a small victory, a promise of the prize to come. Then the scramble. We dashed for the fallen almonds, snatching them from the dirt like gold nuggets, their rugged shells hiding the sweet secret inside. The best part of this adventure was the crack, a sharp, satisfying snap that gave way to the rich, earthy scent of the raw, nutty almond inside. After this mini quest, we collapsed on the hot sidewalk, our hands stained and sticky, shoving the stolen loot into our mouths. It wasn't just a snack, it was a trophy. The taste was a pure, gritty triumph, a perfect, messy magic that was ours and ours alone. But the booty and real prize did not end with the almonds. Within a short walk, in front of the technical college, stood our true objective to reach the baby coconut trees. These trees weren't the tall, graceful palms of postcards. These were ancient, gnarled beasts with heavy branches that slung low over the street like arms, weighed down by clusters of small, green baby coconuts. To us, they weren't just fruit, they enticed us to take them. It was a dangerous adventure that we felt motivated to conquer, not out of sheer hunger, but for the excitement and the experience. So, when we reached a safe distance, we threw rocks higher and higher, aiming with desperate precision, holding our breath as we watched the tangled fronds sail up the trees and eagerly awaited the great fall. A direct hit meant a heavy, thudding boom as a bunch of baby coconuts crashed onto the road. Not far from there, dates hung in sticky, syrupy clusters. Plucking them was a messy assault for us. They burst in our hands, leaving our fingers glued together with a primal, sugary sap. Under the beating sun, we sat on the hot curb, a pile of cracked open loot between us. We weren't just eating, we were enjoying the feast derived from our conquest. We weren't just kids daydreaming of far-off lands. We were explorers who had just raided a foreign jungle and had won the battle. The taste wasn't just sweet, it was gritty, honest, and felt like an entirely different kind of victory. The kitchen and the wild. We did not hunt for those treasures out of hunger, for our mother fortified us against it each day before the sun climbed too high. Our mornings began with the steady, loving rhythm of her preparations. A big pot of porridge that changed with her whims, sometimes corn porridge, sometimes oats, sometimes cream of wheat, sometimes custard, and sometimes the comforting blend of corn and custard. She crafted sandwiches with the care of an artist, mashing cheese with butter and onion, or luncheon meat into a fine spread, or opening tins of sardines. At the same time, some days we had the simple perfection of cheese or eggs from our own homegrown chickens. And always there was a massive mug of freshly made drink, lemonade, sarsop, sorrel, tangy passion fruit, fiery ginger beer, or the sweet, electric appeal of Kool-Aid. My childhood favorite whose charm would later be eclipsed by an appreciation for the real fruit juices she crafted. Before she left for work, a large pot of a different meal was always simmering for our dinner. We were never left wanting. No, our treasures were not sustenance. They were the currency of childhood adventure, guilty pleasures, and secrets my mom went to her grave not knowing about. I have kept them tucked safely inside me, a hidden trove of joy until now. The alchemy of a pencil. Several talents were inherent in Grace. These talents were more than mere skills. One talent, in particular, which I became aware of from our early years, was like a kind of magic. With a simple pencil, she didn't just draw, she unlocked hidden worlds. I remember the first time I saw one of her sketches, a house, but not like any I had ever seen. This one had a roof that seemed to slice the sky, windows that held more lights than glass, and a door that made you feel like you could step right into. This piece of art was alive. I was totally mesmerized by this drawing. Grace noted my fascination and took me under her wing, but this wasn't some gentle art class. It was a decoding of secrets, the secrets to being freely creative. I imagined her voice saying to me, "Forget what a house looks like," in a low, focused tone. Think about what it is. A triangle on a rectangle. That's all it is. Now, make it real. I learned from her like a strategist planning a heist. I observed her and learned how to build a world from the ground up, line by deliberate line. My shaky squares became solid foundations. My wobbly circles became full, heavy moons. My ability to think creatively increased as I learned from Grace. I did not just add trees, I learned to claw them into the paper with the sides of our pencils, making them stretch and twist toward the sun. Moreover, I became fascinated with the technique Grace used to draw birds as she smudged them into existence, displaying them gliding through the clouds against a gray sky. She wasn't just drawing, she was teaching me to see, to tear past the obvious, and pull something out of the soul. Eventually, my drawings of houses became bolder, Messier more true. They were never perfect, and that was the point. Perfect is dead, I learned, her own hands constantly moving, smudging, bringing chaos to life. This is feeling. In the graphite dust and scattered eraser shreds, I found my own voice. Drawing was not my hobby, but writing was my number one hobby. Our artistic moments together were a silent conversation, a shared rebellion against blank pages. She showed me that art isn't about making pretty things. It's about leaving a piece of yourself on the page, a raw, honest mark amidst the beautiful, imperfect chaos. The friendship feast. If you are one of Grace's friends, consider yourself very special and deeply loved. Grace's friendship wasn't loud, it was a steady, glowing ember. She drew people in not with grand gestures, but with a deep, unshakable loyalty that made you feel seen. She collected friends like treasures, each one a unique thread woven into the fabric of her life. However, I'll never forget one specific evening that reminds me of Grace's feelings about friendship. The air in our house was heavy and rich with the weekly smell of fried fish, a delectable meal our mom made for us before we headed out to the garden. That aroma was everything that we anticipated. It was comforting to our souls knowing that we would not be hungry. But then, one of Grace's best friends stopped by. She came from a family in a much better socioeconomic standing than ours, a fact we were always quietly aware of. She laughed and talked, and the aroma of our dinner was clearly stirring her appetite. After she left, we went to the kitchen to finally eat. To our amazement, the plate that contained the cooked fish was empty. The fish that we longed to devour was gone. The shock was a cold splash. We all knew what had happened. In that strained silence, the truth was louder than any accusation. That fish was our dinner. We couldn't just go by more. I saw the understanding flash in Grace's eyes. She could have called her friend out. She could have been angry. Instead, something shimmered in her, not disappointment, but a fierce, protective grace. She spun a story on the spot. Oh, she said, her voice calm, brushing it off with a gentle shrug. That cat must have finally figured out how to jump onto the counter. She had shouldered the blame to spare her friend's shame. She let us go fishless that night to protect a bond she valued more than a meal. In that moment, I didn't see a pushover. I saw a strength so profound that it was almost heartbreaking. She taught me that true friendship isn't about keeping score. It's about sometimes choosing someone else's dignity over your own justice. That stolen fish wasn't just a teachable moment. It was a blueprint of her soul. It was Grace's fierce, self-sacrificing kindness on full display, a raw example of her desire to protect the people she loved, even when it cost her. Moreover, Grace had a way of making you feel safe. When you talked, she really listened, not just waiting for her turn to speak. She'd pull up a chair, lean in, and make you feel like your sorrows were hers to carry. Her understanding was a quiet harbor in someone else's storm. That was her real power. It wasn't loud, flashy, or haughty. It was a quiet, relentless force that didn't demand attention but earned respect. She lived love and compassion so profoundly that it became contagious, inspiring everyone around her to be a little softer, gentler, braver, and kinder. Long after Grace was gone, those tenets never really left the air that she breathed. Her legacy isn't a loud echo, it's a deep, permanent imprint on the hearts of everyone she protected. She showed us how to bear the weight of others, and in doing so, she taught us how to be strong. Chapter 4: The Perfect Lie. Let's be clear, Grace was not perfect. Our story isn't purely softness, quietness, light, and kindness. We were siblings, two sides of the same coin, yeah, but sometimes that coin landed on its edge. We showed our differences. I was all restless energy. She was the one who seemed to float, quiet, and untouchable. I believe that many people saw her as an angel, but I saw my sister. I remember one afternoon, the sun beating down. My mom had just finished combing Grace's hair, smoothing it down with petroleum Vaseline until it shone like a helmet. It was perfect. Then a fight over a neighbor's pile of sand broke out, just kid stuff, until the hairdo became a little less than perfect. In a flash of pure rage, Grace did the unthinkable. She scooped up a handful of coarse, gritty sand and hurled it straight up into the air. We watched it hang there for a second before it cascaded down, burying itself deep in that Vaseline-spiked hair. The silence that followed was sharp. Then the unthinkable happened. She pointed at me. Her lie was flawless. Our mom believed her, of course she did. Who would believe the restless one over the angel? The injustice was a physical burn. I was punished for an offense I did not commit and subsequently forced to watch as Grace's innocence held up under pressure. She didn't say a word. She just watched. It was the first time that I saw that Grace's grace could be a weapon and her silence an accomplice. The truth was, Grace knew that I secretly envied her hair, how it fell long and smooth like silk, while mine coiled tight and nappy against my scalp. Anyone would have readily believed that I had messed up her hair out of jealousy. It was the perfect lie. And she used the perpetrated lie. That day, not only had she thrown sand in her own hair, but she also threw me under the bus with it. With a straight face and those wide, believable eyes, she had spun a story so convincing my mom didn't even look my way twice. I was deemed guilty before I could even gasp. The strap and the silence. I took the punishment. The leather strap, my mother's swift and harsh instrument of justice, landed its few lashes over my back. Each strike was sharp and burning, but the pain was a dull echo compared to the searing truth I was being forced to swallow. My mother's anger was fueled by the belief that I had been cruel, that I had sullied my sister's perfection out of meanness, or the very jealousy I secretly harbored. But I didn't do it, my mind screamed in a silent, frantic loop. Can't you see? She's lying. But my protests were useless against the fortress of Grace's reputation. She stood there, silent, her Vaseline-slick hair still glittering with the gritty evidence. Her conscience, it seemed, was clear. In that moment, I learned a brutal lesson. Innocence could be a costume, and silence could be a weapon. The sting of the leather faded into a dull throb, but the betrayal branded itself onto my soul. She knew exactly what she was doing. She had thrown the sand, and then, with a calm precision that chilled me, she had thrown me under the weight of our mother's disappointment. And she had just stood there and let it happen. The second lie. It started with a whisper of rebellion. I wanted my ears pierced. Grace was all in. Her eyes lit up with a mischievous thrill as she took charge. She got a needle, put a thread through it, and without flinching, assisted me with guiding it straight through my earlobe. The pain was sharp and real, but so was the pride. It felt like a secret victory. She smoothed table butter over the wound. To keep it from closing, she said, and just like that, we were partners in crime. But when our mom came home and saw it, everything changed. Her fury was instant. And before I could even explain, Grace spoke up, calm, convincing, eyes wide with false concern. She did it all by herself. Then the elderly neighbor, who'd watched the whole thing from her window, nodded in agreement. Yes, I saw her. She did it alone. The betrayal wasn't just a lie, it was a performance. They sold the story so well that our mom never doubted it. She told everyone, aunts, uncles, family, friends, about how her reckless daughter had pierced her own ear. They all look at me with a mix of shock and pity, whispering about how heartless I must have been to endure that pain alone. But I hadn't been alone, not until the moment Grace walked away and left me standing there, caught in the spotlight of a lie she'd swiftly concocted. The sting of the needle was nothing compared to the silence that grew between us after that day. She didn't just betray me, she made me an island. Those moments changed things. They stuck with me, shifting how I saw my sister, mixing my offer with something colder, sharper, a slow dawning understanding. Even at this moment, as I'm reflecting on the situation, the feeling comes back, that tightness in my chest, the confusion. However, there's something else, too, a strange sense of peace and relief. It was in those uncomfortable moments that I saw her clearly, not as the angel most people believed her to be, but as a person, flawed, complicated, human, just like me. She could be gentle and guiding in one breath and quietly self-serving in the next. She could make you feel seen, then make you feel invisible. And maybe that's what family really is, not a perfect, shining story, but something real, woven with loyalty and letdowns, tenderness and truth, light and shadow, intimately braided together. It doesn't weaken the bond. On the other hand, and in a strange way, it deepens it. Cut from the same cloth. My early teenage years began at Bastyr Junior High School, now Washington Archibald High School, a whirlwind of new faces, loud noises, and the feeling of constantly being almost lost. However, within a short walk down Victoria Road stood my anchor, the high school where Grace was attending, i.e., the Bastyr High School. To the outside world, we were a study in opposites. Grace was beauty personified, blessed with a cascade of soft, long black hair that was the envy of every girl who saw it. I, on the other hand, had coarse, short hair that required the hot, smoky press of an ironing comb after every wash just to be manageable. Her face was punctuated by a beautiful dimple, and her light skin, so highly favored in those days, made her the fairest child in our home. By every measure of conventional value, she was the princess and I was the black sheep. Even our frames told different stories. Grace had much thicker bones and a strong, healthy build that I desperately longed for. I was so skinny that classmates sometimes cruelly called me names. Her hand-me-downs, which I gladly accepted, always hung loose and baggy on my slender frame. Yet, within the walls of our shared bedroom, these stark differences dissolved. We didn't physically resemble each other, not even a little, but we were cut from the same cloth of sisterhood. Mornings were a quiet ritual of matching without speaking, united by our school's uniform policy. The same khaki-colored socks, the same shade of clothes. Grace would pull up her brown pleated skirt while I buttoned my brown jumper. 2 different uniforms, 2 different schools, but a bond deeper than blood. It was our silent common language, a code that only both of us understood. In the chaos of growing up, those tiny threads, our socks, our shirts, our shared small space were what kept me grounded. Grace was my beacon, my calm, my sister. Grace and I didn't just share a bedroom, it was for all 6 of us. However, our room was a world divided by a thin, hanging cloth, a flimsy barrier separating the 3 boys' side from the girls' territory. On our side, it was Grace, me, and our younger sister Debbie, a tight triangle of girlhood in a cramped space until an addition to our home was made. And we didn't just share a room, we shared the same bed. That bed was our terrain. It was where we whispered secrets that crisscrossed in the dark after the lights went out, where we built a fragile sisterhood under one worn, warm blanket. It was where, night after night, the three of us navigated the unspoken rules of shared space, whose turn it was to sleep in the middle, who kicked in their sleep, who stole the covers. In that crowded room, with the sound of our brothers breathing just beyond a thin curtain, the matching socks and shirts weren't just a style. They were a declaration, a signal that even in the chaos of one bed, one room, one family, she and I were linked. We were a team, a unit, a pair forged in the beautiful, messy intimacy of having nowhere else to be but right there, together. A postman's voucher, a daughter's socks. Grace's two pairs of socks were veterans, thin, faded, and impossibly soft from 3 years of hard wear. They had seen every class at her junior and senior high schools and walked every sun-baked street in Basse-Terre. My pair, however, was a different story. They were solid, high-quality socks from the Bata store, a gift from my stepdad. He was a postman, and he'd used his hard-earned voucher not for himself, but to get me a new pair for school. They were a rich, uniform brown, with a dense weave that felt both sturdy and perfect against my skin. They looked and felt amazing, a small but significant treasure in our world. Yet, holding them, I felt an immense pressure. They were so new, so full of potential. It was as if they might unravel not from where, but from the sheer weight of the hope and kindness woven into their very threads. After school, we had our routine. We washed our clothes carefully and hung them side by side on the clothesline in our backyard. Two pairs of socks swung in the warm tropical breeze. It was a quiet promise. We were in this together. Then came the morning that shattered our communion. My socks were gone, just totally vanished without a trace. Panic hit me like a wave. I scrambled through our cramped, divided room, past the hanging cloth separating the boys' western side from our eastern girls' territory, searching under the shared bed and in every nook and cranny. Still, to my disappointment, I found nothing. My heart hammered. Those socks weren't just socks. They were one of the few things that felt truly mine. After feeling helpless, I finally turned to Grace, my voice tight, and asked, "Have you seen my socks?" She stopped. Her eyes scanned mine, and for a second, I saw a flicker of something. Worry, yes, but something else, too. Something deeper. She didn't answer right away. She just looked at me, and in that silence, everything felt uncertain. "Here," she said, her voice soft and calm. "Wear mine." She handed me one of her own socks, stretched thin from years of use, the elastic tired, but still holding on. It felt foreign property landed on my feet, loose and oversized, like wearing someone else's skin. But something about it was comforting, too. They smelled like her, like Grace, not just her name, but the thing she carried everywhere she went. For many days, I held on to that gratitude. She had given me something when I had nothing. Those socks were more than fabric. They were a truce. Sometime after, my socks surprisingly reappeared. They were folded neatly, as if they were never gone. When I pulled them on, though, my heart sank. They were stretched to the point of warping. They hung loose on my ankles, just like Grace's. It was subtle, but I noticed their shape had changed, too. They didn't feel like mine anymore. They felt like hers and mine. Had she worn them? Did they stretch on her feet while I wore hers? Or did an overnight miracle cause them to be stretched out to her size because she had lent me hers? I never asked. I never could. But in that small, strange moment, it was like our lives had literally stretched into one another's shape. We were sharing more than a room or a bed. We were sharing steps, struggles, and now, socks that didn't quite fit either of us anymore. Every time I looked down at those stretched out socks, I wasn't just seeing loose threads and faded cotton. My mind went right back in that room. The hanging cloth, the crowded bed, the quiet understanding between sisters that some things do not need to be said. Similar to many teens, Grace and I didn't dance through adolescence. We navigated it, awkward, unsure, leaning on each other when nothing else felt steady. Those socks became a quiet symbol of it all, her generosity, my loss, and the way our lives were so tangled together that we sometimes didn't know where one of us ended and the other began. The sock story was proof that connection is not always pretty. Sometimes the connection is stretched, at other times it is borrowed, and sometimes it just doesn't fit perfectly. And long after those socks wore down to nothing, the indelible mark they left remained, not as a grand lesson, but as a quiet understanding. A reminder that in a world full of noise, the simplest things, like a pair of socks, can carry the deepest. Chapter 5: The Princess and Her Books. Of all the things that defined Grace, her kindness, her quiet strength, the way that she filled a room without saying a word, perhaps the most defining was her love for reading. While the rest of our world was loud, crowded, and constantly moving, Grace built a sanctuary not with walls, but with pages. Books were her escape, her confidants, her quiet rebellion. However, in the worn spines of her most beloved stories, I saw a part of her that only a few others could see: the dreamer, the adventurer, the girl who believed in mysteries waiting to be solved. Grace didn't just read books, she lived in them. Her world was built page by page, a quiet refuge where she could escape everything. Her most loyal companion was a beat-up Hardy Boys adventure novel series. The covers were very creased. The pages were soft as cloth from being held so often. Those stories were her passport out of our small room, out of her quiet, thoughtful life, and into a world of daring mysteries and midnight clues. Moreover, she didn't just turn pages, she absorbed them. You would have seen it in her eyes, that flicker of being somewhere else. Adventure was more than a genre for her, it was a craving. Many years later, I had the privilege of meeting the author of the stories that Grace relished. I told him about Grace, about how his words had not just entertained her, but given her courage. He listened, really listened, his gaze sharp and knowing, like he understood better than anyone how a story could become part of someone's soul. Then he told me about his other passion, teaching French. He spoke about the language as if it, too, were a kind of story, full of rhythm, romance, and mystery. In that moment, something clicked. It felt like more than a coincidence. It felt like a thread, thin but unbreakable, connecting Grace's quiet afternoons with this legendary storyteller, and now me. It was a full circle moment, quiet but profound, one of those rare times when life doesn't just move forward. It bends back and whispers that nothing, not even loss, is ever really gone. But if you really knew Grace, you knew that she was never about the noise. Large crowds and loud parties didn't just bore her, they drained her. She was like a candle in a storm, merely flickering, fragile, and almost invisible. She came alive in the quiet during long, thoughtful walks with just the sound of the wind, or standing in the front of the yard with one or two close friends talking for hours. Her real social world was her church. Not just the sermons or the songs, but the people. It was her refuge. In small group discussions, she didn't just share her faith, she lived it. Those moments weren't duties, they were connections. That was her kind of crowd, a circle of trust, not a room full of strangers. Alone, Grace wasn't lonely. She was powerful. She wove together everything that made her who she was: her books, her quiet mind, her deep faith into a kind of private strength. Her heart was like a library, full of stories that understood her better than most people could. Additionally, reading a book was an invitation for Grace. The characters felt real, their adventures almost tangible, as if they were whispering to her that her own life, quiet as it seemed, was its own kind of mystery, a story of courage, thought, and belief. Hers wasn't a life told in loud declarations. It was written in quiet moments, in turned pages, in acts of kindness no one saw. And maybe that was the most profound adventure of all. While I was piecing together memories of my sister Grace, our youngest sister, Debbie reminded me of a story that captures Grace's essence. It's a tale of her two great loves, her bed and a good book. Debbie recounted a day when Grace was lost in another world, the world of one of her favorite novels. Curled up in her bed, surrounded by pillows, she was so engrossed that leaving her story felt like an impossible task to break. But Grace needed something, an object just out of reach. So, what did she do? She called for reinforcements. From another part of the house, Debbie heard her name being summoned as if someone desperately needed help. When she arrived at Grace's doorway, she found her older sister looking at her with a pleading smile. There, within the same room, was what Grace wanted, right above her head. The next book in the series was waiting to be read. Getting up would mean breaking the spell of the story. Debbie, she beckoned. Could you please hand me that? I just can't put my book down and need to get right into the next. Debbie was annoyed, realizing that she was summoned from her own activities just so that Grace wouldn't have to leave the comfort of her literary adventure. It was one of many moments that frustrated her, but it spoke volumes about Grace's passion for doing what made her happy. She can be viewed as being lazy, but she was dedicated. When Grace loved something, she gave it her whole attention. Chapter 6: Spirituality. The Quiet Fire. Grace's world was built on three things: faith, family, and a deep love for a good mystery. Every morning, she woke up with the sun. However, our mom woke up long before the sun was up. Our first words were a quiet prayer, less like a ritual and more like a conversation with an old friend. After praying, Grace sang hymns too, even though she could not carry a tune. However, it never mattered. What came out of her mouth wasn't about melody, it was about meaning. You felt it, the weight, the heart, the devotion ringing through our small home, slightly off key but entirely true. To add to the spiritual values that Grace possessed, the walls of our house were covered in our mother's handwriting. Bible verses were carefully written on pieces of paper and taped up like sacred graffiti. Grace didn't just read those words, she assimilated and acted on them. I sometimes watched her as she absorbed the written words. To her, those verses weren't simple tautological biblical quotes. They were promises and guides for safe living. They felt alive. And Sundays? Sundays were very special days in our home. Everyone in our home attended the Antioch Baptist Church service, which began at 11 a.m. After church, the house smelled like a five-star hotel's scrumptious baking, even though we did not have an oven. It smelled like something sweet, something warm, and all of my siblings, plus Mom, gathered simultaneously, not because we had to, but because we wanted to. In those moments, we were more than a family merely related by blood. We were a unified team, a small circle held together by shared beliefs, freshly cooked food, and the quiet certainty that we were part of something bigger. Grace didn't just go to church, she belonged to it. When those heavy wooden doors swung open, she slipped inside like she was coming home to where she belonged. The church's atmosphere felt different to her. It was ripe with shared prayer and humming with peace that she couldn't find anywhere else. Attending church more than following rules or perfection for Grace. It was about people. She found purpose in the small things. Her faith wasn't a performance, it was practice. Just like our darling mother, Grace carried scripture more like a toolkit rather than a textbook. The verses she memorized were more than pretty words. They were lessons in resilience, reminders of hope, and blueprints for love and kindness. She wove them quietly into conversations, offering them not as judgments, but as gentle gifts. Grace's light didn't come from preaching, it came from presence, the presence of the Most High. Her belief was a quiet, steady fire within her, something that shaped her actions, her silence, and the way she held space for others without ever saying a word. With a spirit that refused to break, Grace met life's challenges head on. Her strength didn't come from yelling. It came from something deeper, something like the hymns she sang, imperfect but full of meaning. Every note was a stitch in the fabric of her gratitude, tying her closer to what she believed in. She knew more than anything that in a complicated world, it was love that lit the way. Not a sappy, easy love, but a real, stubborn, show up kind. The kind she read about in those well worn verses now engraved in her bones. Grace's faith wasn't something she practiced, it was something she lived boldly but quietly. Her faith shone in how she listened to the radio and to others, in how she forgave, in how she chose hope even when things were hard. She was living her own story, one built on belief, curiosity, and the courage to be exactly who she was. Hers was a life that didn't need to be loud to leave an echo. In the quiet curls of her solitude, Grace wove her passions into a beautiful tapestry, shimmering with the vibrant threads of literature, introspection, and the unwavering glow of her faith. Like a library rich with tales, her heart brimmed with stories that resonated deeply, offering comfort and refuge as they mirrored her own intricate journey. She sought adventure, not in raucous escapades, but in the soft, hidden corners of everyday life, where mysteries lay waiting to be unfolded. Each time she tugged another volume from the bookshelf, it felt as if the characters leaped forth, eager to share the secrets they held. In their tales, Grace unearthed profound truths, beckoning her to embrace the idea that life itself was a grand narrative, one woven with threads of courage, an unwavering spirit, and the luminous glow of faith. It dawned on her then that her own story was unique, a tapestry woven with care, waiting patiently for the ink of her voice to flow across its blank pages. Moreover, as she settled into her favorite nook, the tattered novel nestled in her lap, Grace smiled, allowing the silence to wrap around her like a familiar shawl. Her journey was just beginning. Grace's faith was not something she wore, it was something she carried. Quietly, deeply, like a heartbeat. It was in the way she prayed before sunrise, the way she found meaning in worn Bible verses taped to the wall, and the way she showed up for others without needing praise. Her spirituality wasn't about being perfect. It was about being present. It was a light she tended to with care, one that grew not from loud sermons, but from silent strength, steady love, and the courage to believe even when things were hard. Chapter 7, After High School. Dedication to Nursing. Immediately after graduating from high school, Grace traded the typical senior summer for the stark, sterile halls of nursing school. It was her first and only job outside our parents' house, and she dove in completely. For Grace, nursing was a calling. She worked on all of the hospital wards, but she especially loved the pediatric ward, a place where her compassion wasn't just a skill, it was a shield. She was the guardian of the most vulnerable, the tiny infants whose lives were measured in ounces and heartbeats. To their parents, her warm demeanor and gentle touch were a lifeline, a soothing presence that lifted the weight of their fear. But in the quiet moments after the parents had left and the lights were dimmed, the ward changed. The soft coos of the newborns could sound like whispers in the hushed dark. The sweet scent of Johnson's baby powder sometimes couldn't quite mask the sharp, metallic tang of antiseptic. The blame game. A story of Grace having to repeat a class during nursing school hit me hard. It's a moment etched into my mind, not just as a setback for her, but as a collision between us. I remember the day she got the news with perfect, painful clarity. The atmosphere in the house shifted. You could feel the disappointment and frustration rolling off of her. She looked me straight in the eye and told me it was my fault. The day she found out she had to repeat a course, she unleashed all her fear and frustration on me. Her argument? I was slacking off at home. While she was killing herself trying to study, she felt I wasn't pulling my weight. Because of me, she insisted she didn't have the time to prepare. Because of me, she failed. Failing a class was a massive blow to Grace's dream of becoming a nurse. And when it happened, she didn't just get sad, she got angry at me. Her accusation was a gut punch. Grace believed that if I had helped more at home with the chores, the responsibilities, she would have had the time and energy to study. In her eyes, my failure to help more directly led to her failing that exam. My actions, or lack thereof, had cost her a crucial step toward her dream. Can you imagine being blamed for someone else's dream hitting a wall? The guilt and shame I felt were overwhelming. It was a classic, high-stakes sibling war where the pressure of real life turned us against each other. It was a heavy burden to place on my shoulders, a moment of sharp pain that changed the dynamics between us. However, that wasn't the end of our story. The truth of what really happened is much more complicated, and it reveals even more about the incredible person Grace was. But this argument was just one chapter in our complex relationship. To understand how we got past it, if we got past it, you have to keep reading. I carried the weight of our household in a different way, not at the stove or the wash basin, but as the architect of our daily survival. While Grace managed meals and laundry, I was the substitute parent, orchestrating our chaotic household. I managed, taught, and disciplined our four younger siblings, creating structure and stability from sunrise to well after dark. So, when she blamed me for her failed course, the accusation cut deeply. The truth was, we were both crumbling under the immense pressure of responsibilities we were too young to bear. She saw the two tasks I didn't do, but was blind to the countless ones I did. Her anger found a target, but the real enemy was the burden itself. Two truths, one roof. The accusation was a fracture in our world. In Grace's eyes, my failure to assist with cooking and laundry was a direct contributor to her academic struggle. From my perspective, I was silently upholding the entire architecture of our home, managing, teaching, and caring for our four younger siblings from dawn until dusk. The lesson that slowly and painfully emerged from this conflict was not about fault, but about perception. We were two people drowning in the same storm, but clinging to different pieces of wreckage. I learned that under immense pressure, vision narrows. It becomes difficult to see the burdens others are carrying when your own is so heavy. This experience taught me that accurate understanding begins when we dare to ask not, "Why aren't you helping me?" but "What weight are you carrying that I cannot see?" It was a hard-earned lesson in empathy, one that revealed how shared struggle can sometimes be the very thing that binds us to one another. The weight of what if. Even though I knew, logically, that Grace's course failure wasn't my fault, a tiny, nagging voice of doubt started whispering in my head. It's a voice I think everyone hears at some point, and it's ruthless. What if? What if I had just tried harder? What if I had pushed past my own insecurity and taken over the cooking? Could that one small act have lifted enough pressure from Grace's shoulders? Could it have given her the few extra hours of study time that would have changed everything? Carrying the blame that she placed on me was one thing. However, carrying the guilt of my own inaction was something else entirely, a heavier, quieter burden. The idea that I might have held the key to preventing her failure, even a little, haunted me for a long time. This was the real cost of that difficult time, not just a failed class, but the what if that lingered between us. The secret to getting in. Understanding how Grace got into nursing school is key to understanding the pressure she was under. It wasn't a given. In those days, it was about who you knew. This whole situation felt so high stakes because I remember what it took for Grace to get into nursing school in the first place. It wasn't as simple as just filling out a form. Back then, you needed a connection and in. I'll never forget the day my mom went on a mission. She walked across the road to see Nurse Garnett, the matron of the hospital. My mom, who worked as a maid at that very hospital, had to summon all her courage to ask this powerful woman for a favor. Please let her daughter, Grace, into the nursing program. Think about that for a second. My mom, in her maid's uniform most days, advocating for her daughter's future with the boss. She had that kind of fire. She valued education so much that she was willing to face any obstacle. To cross the road, see Nurse Garnett, the matron of the hospital. My mom, who worked as a maid at that very hospital, had to summon all her courage to ask this powerful woman for a favor. Please let her daughter, Grace, into the nursing program. Obviously, it worked. Nurse Garnett agreed to look at Grace's application. But that moment always stayed with me. My mom was a maid, but she was also a fiercely intelligent woman with huge dreams for her children. She knew the system, and she was willing to step up and challenge it for Grace. My mom put on her best clothes and went to plead for her daughter's case with the head nurse, Matron Garnett. What would have happened if my mom hadn't done that? Grace, with her quiet, shy nature, might never have found the courage to push through those gates herself. We were the opposite in this characteristic. I would have charged right in and demanded an application review and interview. Grace needed someone to open the door for her first. It makes you wonder how many brilliant people got left behind simply because they did not dare to knock or they have an unconscious fear of rejection. This is the real backdrop to her failing that class. It wasn't just her dream on the line. It was a dream our mom had fought for. That's a weight that could make anyone crack. A privilege, not a right. The pain of failing that course was magnified 1,000-fold by the precarious nature of her opportunity. In the street kits and Nevis of that era, entry into nursing school was not a right earned by grades alone. It was a privilege often granted through influence and personal appeal. Grace's place was not simply given. It was pleaded for by our mother, who had to cross both a physical road and a vast social divide to humble herself before Matron Garnett. This was the unspoken truth behind her studies. Her seat in that classroom was built on the foundation of our mother's courage. To fail, therefore, felt like more than an academic misstep. It risked being a profound betrayal of that hard-won chance, a validation of every unspoken barrier that our mother had fought to overcome. The weight she carried wasn't just the fear of personal disappointment, but the terror of squandering an inherited hope. That same resilience I so admired in my sister Grace could not be subdued for long. In the face of that setback, Grace became the architect of her own focus. She devised a strict study method, carving out sacred, undisturbed hours in which she would retreat into her books with quiet ferocity. The following semester, she didn't just reattempt the course, she mastered it. Her passing grade was more than an academic victory. It was a testament to her unwavering will, a quiet declaration that she would not be defined by a single failure. It was a lesson in tenacity, proving that her spirit, though momentarily shaken, was ultimately unbreakable. Chapter 8: Creativity and Resourcefulness. During summer vacations, before Grace graduated from Basse-Terre High School, 1980, the sun would hang heavy and golden over our yard. The air would smell of coal smoke, ripening fruit, or whatever Grace was creating in our makeshift outdoor kitchen. Long before she graduated from high school, she had already mastered the art of making something from nothing. Her stage was a battered pan balanced carefully on a coal pot, our homemade oven, built from necessity and fueled by pure imagination. Every Christmas, we embarked on our secret baking ritual, a conspiracy of a cake and warmth that we shared among ourselves. When that first slice was cut, it was moist, sweet, and perfectly unbaked. It wasn't just a cake, it was a quiet victory. Proof that we could create joy, even when we had very little. The coal pot cake, a taste of Grace's genius. Of all her imaginative ventures, one memory from her high school years stands out vividly in my siblings and my minds. perfectly capturing her inventive spirit. In those days, our kitchen was very simple. We did not yet own an oven. Our cooking was done on a two-burner oil stove, with a coal pot kept outside for additional cooking. Each Christmas, the much anticipated ritual of baking our cake involved borrowing a small, portable oven from my mother's best friend, Nellie Stapleton. This oven, which we carefully balanced on top of the oil stove. It was against this backdrop of making do that Grace's creativity truly shone. I recall the day, while my mom was at work, when Grace first approached me, a spark of excitement in her eyes, envisioning something we had never dared to attempt ourselves. She proposed we build our very own baking oven, independent of Ms. Stapleton's borrowed one. What equipment did she use? A simple empty tin pan and the top of our outdoor coal pot. Our hearts were full of hope as we assembled her ingenious design. Yet, what would become of a cake baked in such an unconventional way? The outcome of that first attempt was not what we expected. While our makeshift oven, lacking a proper door to trap the heat, refused to yield a perfectly risen cake, it produced something perhaps even more memorable than one might have guessed. The result was a testament to her persistence, a delicious, edible creation that, against all odds, filled our mouths with flavor and our hearts with the profound lesson that Grace could conjure magic from the simplest materials. This early experiment was a humble beginning in our journey toward an equipped kitchen. After Grace and I became employed, we finally upgraded to the marvel of a full four-burner stove with its own built-in oven. But no cake that ever came out of that modern oven tasted quite as triumphant as the one my sister Grace concocted from a tin pan and a coal pot. Stitched with belief. Another memory as vivid as any is of the day she sewed my high school uniform, that carefully pleated skirt. The day I slipped on the high school uniform she had sewn for me by hand, I felt her belief in me, stitched into every seam. She measured me without a pattern, cut without hesitation, and sewed late into the night. When I looked in the mirror, it wasn't just a uniform skirt I saw. It was the essence of patience and pride. It was love made visible. In a world that often felt uncertain, Grace taught me how to build certainty with her hands, her heart, and her stubborn, beautiful refusal to be limited by what we lacked. She didn't just make things. She made me believe that we could make anything. An inheritance of ingenuity. Grace possessed a boundless creativity, a true inheritance from our darling mother, Iona Barrage. Her hands were rarely still, always bringing beauty to life through crocheting, knitting, and intricate embroidery. She would lovingly knit tiny baby boots as gifts for her friends, and every bag she carried was a unique creation from her own hands. I fondly remember our childhood collaborations, weaving sturdy church bags from straw or crafting school bags from the fabric of old jeans and discarded sugar and flour sacks. Motherhood. When motherhood arrived for me, a chapter equal parts thrilling and terrifying Grace was there, steady as always. Her way of caring took shape in the maternity dresses she sewed for me, each one stitched with a unique genre of patience that I had not yet possessed. I could feel her love in the fit of the fabric, in the way the seams curved gently around my changing body. Wearing them felt like being wrapped in her belief in me, especially on days I doubted myself. Although Grace had learned to sew from our mom, she added something of her own, something fierce and tender all at once. In her hands, thread became a language. A holiday cake baked on a coal pot, a school uniform cut and sewn without a pattern, a dress made for a body blooming with life. These weren't just things she made. They were quiet declarations. Proof that love could be measured in flour, cloth, and time. Grace had a way of turning scarcity into abundance, worry into warmth. She didn't just give me dresses, she gave me confidence. She didn't just bake cakes, she built tradition. And long after those dresses were outgrown and the cakes eaten, what remained was the feeling that in every stitch, every slice, Every shared glance, she was saying, I see you. I'm with you. We can do this. We got this. In everything she did, Grace wrapped me in a sense of belonging as steady and comforting as a warm quilt on a cold night. There was always a certain light in her eyes when she worked her magic, a soft, focused glow that reminded me that true artistry lives not in what you make, but why you make it. Her hands were rarely still. They measured, stirred, stitched, and smoothed, weaving joy and purpose into the ordinary moments of our lives. She taught me that no matter how hard things felt beyond our yard, inside it, there was always something beautiful being made, something infused with love. In addition to creating material things, Grace created connections. A legacy not of perfect objects, but of meaning. And long after the cakes were eaten and the dresses outgrown, that love remains not as a memory, but as a presence. It echoes in the quiet moments, a lasting reminder that she is still, in so many ways, stitching us all together. Her uniform was her armor. In a place where nurses were treated like house slaves or glorified servants for medical doctors, my sister Grace commanded respect without ever saying a word. She did it with her appearance. Everyone noticed Grace. She was legendary for her flawless, put-together look. While other uniforms were sometimes rumpled, hers was sharp and crisp, looking like it had just come from a professional dry cleaner. The secret? Our mom made starch from scratch, and Grace would iron with such precision that her uniform became a symbol, a white, immaculate shield. Her hair, always in the same classic, signature style, never looked tired or stale. It was fresh every single day, worn with quiet confidence that matched her name. And her shoes? She would have our youngest sister, Debbie, polish them until they shone like spick and spank new mirrors. No one could ever say Grace looked unkempt. In the chaos of blood and bandages, she was a portrait of control and pride. This wasn't just about looking good. This was her silent rebellion. In a system that tried to make some nurses feel small and dirty, her impeccable presence was a powerful statement. I am a professional. I have dignity, and you will not disrespect me. Grace was the ideal nurse, inside and out. Summary. In my opinion, Grace's creativity was her quiet rebellion against limitation. With little more than determination and love, she turned simple ingredients into celebration, scraps of fabric into confidence, and fleeting moments into lifelong memories. Whether baking a cake over a coal pot, sewing a uniform by hand, or stitching a maternity dress, she instilled hope. She showed us that resourcefulness isn't about what you have, but about what you make from it. Her true artistry lived in the intention behind every creation, each stitch, every slice. All of it was infused with a love that outlasted the object itself. Grace didn't just make things, she made meaning. And that legacy continues to shape us, long after the last thread was tied. Chapter 9: Health and Wellness. The kitchen in our home at Trafalgar Village was more than a room. It was a sanctuary. When our mom left for Virgin Gorda to visit our stepdad, Grace stepped into it like it was her own. The air quickly filled with the sound of sizzling garlic and the low hum of onions softening in the pan. Clattering pots and shifting plates became her rhythm. This wasn't just cooking, it was a kind of command. Grace moved with a quiet purpose, filling the space our mom left behind not with uncertainty, but with certainty, her own. She was full of contrasts, a health advocate who preached vitality from a body that fought its own private battles every month, but you would have never known by watching her. She cooked like our mom taught her, with color, care, and intention. Every pepper chopped, every herb sprinkled, was placed with thought. She believed food could do more than fill you up. It could lift you, heal you, and connect you. To watch Grace cook was to watch an artist who knew her palate by heart. She more than fed us. She reminded us that even when things felt uncertain, there could still be warmth, flavor, and joy, served right on the plate. After Grace graduated from Bastyr High School, she stepped straight into her calling, nursing. Suddenly, our home wasn't just ours. It became a quiet refuge for neighbors, friends, even strangers seeking advice. People came with questions about stress, pain, diet, minor injuries, and life in general. Grace's voice remained steady, practical, and kind. She didn't just hand out bandages or medical tips. She offered calm and hope of healing. She helped people rethink how they fed their bodies and their souls. But what few people saw was the private battle raging beneath her calm exterior. Every month, like clockwork, the storm would hit. Crippling cramps, nausea that left her pale and trembling and vomiting. The very same healer who soothed others was suddenly brought to her knees, forced to retreat behind closed doors, curled tight against the pain. In those moments, the woman who radiated strength was locked in a silent struggle. The moon would wax and wane, and so would she. A tempest endured alone, in the dark, before emerging once again, steady-handed and soft-spoken, as if nothing had happened. After a few days shut away, Grace would re-emerge, not just recovered, but resolved. She turned her pain into a quiet mission. Where others stayed silent about menstrual periods and pain, she spoke with clarity and calm, her own struggle lending weight to her words. She didn't give speeches. She started conversations, gently pulling back the curtain on topics people rarely discussed. When she stepped back into the kitchen, it felt like a sanctuary restored. Cooking wasn't just cooking for Grace, it was her way of healing, both herself and others. Every dish she prepared came with something you couldn't see but could always feel: empathy, a sprinkle of care, a gesture that said, "I see you." I've been there too. Slowly, something shifted in Trafalgar Village. Grace's quiet strength became a kind of quiet leadership. She wasn't loud or preachy, just steady, present. She showed everyone that even when you're hurting, you can still show up. You can still care. You can still help. Her legacy wasn't built on big moments or grand gestures. It lived in the small things, in the lingering smell of garlic and thyme in our kitchen, in the comfortable silence shared over a warm meal, in the way people began to speak a little more openly because she had first. Grace taught us that healing isn't always dramatic. Sometimes it's just a pot on the stove, a listened to story, a hand on a shoulder. Sometimes the strongest people are the ones who soften the world around them just by being in it. Grace's journey with health was defined by a quiet, profound strength. Behind her role as a compassionate nurse and nurturing presence lay private battles with pain and fatigue, struggles she faced monthly, often in solitude. Yet she never allowed her suffering to dim her light. Instead, she channeled it into empathy, using her own experience to guide, comfort, and heal others. Through food, conversation, and unwavering compassion, Grace showed that wellness is not defined by the absence of pain, but the courage to care for others even while hurting. Her legacy lives on in the hearts she comforted and the community she inspired, a reminder that true health is woven with resilience, grace, and love. Chapter 10: Code Blue in the Pew. Some of the most important stories about our own families aren't remembered, they're reported to us. I was recently reminded of a moment that perfectly captures my sister, Grace. This story had been quietly sitting in the past for decades until a pastor, Rydell Blake, brought it back to life. It happened at the Antioch Baptist Church in the early 1980s. I was there that night, but the memory had faded completely. Hearing it again felt like unlocking a secret chapter of my sister's life, a vivid snapshot of the incredible person she was. It's the story of a crisis, a quiet young nurse, and the moment her quietness molded into something extraordinary. Pastor Blake explained that the air in Antioch Baptist Church was thick with hymns and summer heat. He was seated in the second pew, engaged while the lead pastor's voice rose and fell. The lead pastor's name was Pastor William Connor. Pastor Blake's face drifted when he saw it, a tiny, almost invisible tremor from a woman who was sitting up front in the church. It was just a flicker, a slight stiffening of her shoulders. Most people wouldn't have noticed, but Pastor Blake did. He leaned forward. His own emotions were instantly replaced by a cold prickling in his neck. Something was wrong. The female church attendee's head gave a tiny, unnatural jerk. The preacher kept on preaching, oblivious to what was happening. The lead pastor was standing next to the piano and did not see the problem lurking. It was like a secret, a terrible one, playing out in plain sight. However, Pastor Blake nudged the person who was sitting next to him. "Look," he whispered, his voice tight. I think she's in trouble." That's when it happened. A blur of motion erupted from the choir stand. It was Grace, the new young nurse. She didn't walk. She launched from her seat like a bullet, moving so fast it stole the air from the pastor's lungs. In a heartbeat, she was down the aisle, kneeling beside the woman, who was now a casualty, beginning to slump in her chair. The spell of the sermon was suddenly shattered. People gasped in amazement. Another nurse, a sister, who was experienced, proper, and always seemed to be in control, was there too. However, she appeared to have frozen in time. Some might have even thought that she appeared to be more of a spectator than a first aider as her body hovered with uncertainty. Not Grace. Grace was a force of nature. Her voice, usually so quiet in the school hallways, was suddenly calm yet commanding. She took charge with an authority that completely transformed her. Mr. Blake declared, "I'd known Grace for years. She was the girl who never raised her hand, who seemed to live in the background." But in this crisis, a different person emerged, a leader, fierce and capable, Pastor Blake explained. Pastor Blake pointed out that he will never forget the image. Our seasoned head nurse, a sister, not just in a religious context, but in a high-ranking position in the nursing profession, was stunned into stillness, and Grace, a whirlwind of purpose, worked to restore the woman's quickly fading health. It was more than just medical skill on display. It was a critical, genuine, lightning-fast response that revealed a heart that was bigger than the building itself. This incident made me realize something about people. Some are like the sister, a seasoned nurse. Their concern is quiet and careful. But others, like Grace, have a hero sleeping inside them, waiting for the moment to wake. And that night, we all saw Grace come alive. What was it that triggered her that night? What other secrets did the quiet girl from his science class hide? The story was just unfolding. Chapter 11: The Unshakable Nurse. Grace versus Hurricane Hugo. September 19th, 1989. The entire island of St. Kitts and Nevis was supposed to have a big party. It was our 6th independence celebration, a time for music, parades, and pride. But a destructive, monstrous, uninvited guest crashed into the party in the form of Hurricane Hugo. The festive atmosphere vanished before it even started. It was replaced by an eerie, howling silence before the storm. The sky turned a sickly green-gray. Instead of celebrating, we were nailing boards over windows, praying our roofs would hold. When Hugo finally hit, it wasn't just a storm. It was a raging beast trying to tear our world apart. You could hear the terrifying sound of metal roofs screeching as they were ripped from houses and tossed into fury. No one in their right mind would step outside. Everyone was told to stay put, to hide. But my sister, Grace, a nurse at the Joseph N. France General Hospital, had a different idea. As the wind screamed, she got dressed in her uniform. My younger sister was staring at her, thinking that she was crazy. "You can't go out there. It's suicide," she pleaded. We didn't have a car or any other form of transportation. The roads were expected to be rivers of debris. How would she even get there? Was she planning to walk through a hurricane? But Grace had that look in her eye, the one that said her duty to her patients was more important than her own safety. Just as she was ready to face the unimaginable, a miracle happened. A vehicle appeared through the sheets of rain, like a ghost ship on a violent sea, right in front of our home. It was Kenneth Samuel and his daughter, Magidor. They excitedly stated that they were sightseeing, but they were chasing the dangerous adrenaline of the storm, taking pictures of any fallen trees and ocean waves crashing over the Bay Road before the eye of the hurricane hit. When they saw Grace in her uniform, they understood her loyalty. In a moment of crazy courage, they offered her a ride to the hospital as she was already dressed and leaving with her raincoat and umbrella. That drive to the hospital wasn't just a commute, it was a life of danger mission through a war zone. Grace worked through the night while Hugo tried to destroy everything. The next day, exhausted, she finally returned home and was met with a new disaster. The hurricane had stolen most of the roof from our mother's house, where Grace lived with our mom and 4 younger siblings. While she was saving lives, her own home was being shattered. Fortunately, or by divine intervention, Grace's room was untouched, and that's where Debbie and our mom sought refuge during the worst part of the hurricane. But that was Grace. She never let anything stop her from her work. Even on regular days, when she was doubled over with severe monthly cramps that would send anyone else to the emergency room, she would still go to work. Sometimes, the ambulance meant for others had to bring her back home. She was unshakable. This is just one story of why. Chapter 12, Romantic Relationship. To everyone who knew her, Grace's life was a closed book. Romantic relationships were a chapter she had always skipped. Her reserved nature kept potential suitors at a comfortable distance. That's why her courtship with Reggie sent a ripple of surprise through everyone. It began at the Antioch Baptist Church, a place of familiar peace. But I believe the moment Reggie's eyes met hers, Grace felt a jolt, a feeling that was equal parts thrilling and terrifying. He didn't just see her shyness. He seemed to look straight through it, as if he could see a secret, vibrant spirit she kept hidden from the world. His patience felt like a safe harbor, his understanding a quiet force that slowly drew her out. It is believed that she found herself opening up to him in ways she never thought possible, feeling both cherished and exposed. It was all so perfect, almost too perfect. Wedding. The early morning sun felt too bright, too cheerful for the knot of nerves tightening in my stomach. Its light spilled through the windows of my preschool, now utterly transformed. I had spent hours turning this vibrant, chaotic space of finger paints and tiny chairs into an elegant haven for Grace's wedding reception. Every streamer was hung, every tablecloth smoothed to perfection. It was a sanctuary built by my own hands, a secret mission wrapped in silk and satin, and the trust felt as fragile as a sugar glass decoration. My real domain, however, was the kitchen. Armed with a whisk and spatula, I had become a one-woman culinary army. The aromas of my labor now danced through the decorated space, the savory, earthy simmer of delicious chicken, the sharp tang of signature cocktails, the buttery scent of 100 pastries. This was my gift, a feast from my hands to her heart. Every dish was a whispered secret of our friendship, simmering with tenderness for the unbreakable bond that had seen both sunny days and stormy nights. My fruit punch was my secret weapon, my masterpiece. While others relied on mixes and syrups, mine was an alchemy of sun-ripened, natural fruits, a flavor so vibrant and authentic that no one, no matter how they tried, could ever quite master my recipe. It was more than a drink. It was liquid joy, and I guarded its creation like a sacred rite. As I poured the deep crimson nectar into the glass dispensers, watching the slices of blended colors from the fruits, I felt a surge of fierce pride. This pride wasn't arrogant, it was defensive. I had poured every ounce of love that I possessed into making every single dish, every drink that could have graced this reception. Each flavor was a memory, each spice a testament to our years of friendship. Grace was not just my sister, she was my friend. This feast was my armor for Grace, a buffer against any imperfection the day might throw at her. But that pride was a fragile thing, a bright balloon tethered by a single, taut thread of anxiety. I had given everything. Would it be enough? The punch, with its unparalleled flavor, was my boldest declaration of love. I just prayed it wouldn't also be a reminder of everything that had to be perfect. The cake. But amidst all this, the food, the drinks, the decorations I'd painstakingly arranged sat the one thing I didn't make. On a central pedestal, magnificent and imposing, was the three-layer wedding cake. Another baker had created it. Its flawless, fondant-clad perfection seemed to watch me, a silent reminder that even in this circle of trust, some responsibilities were entrusted to others. I had built the entire world for her celebration, but that towering symbol of sweetness was not my own. The thought was a tiny, sharp pinprick in the balloon of my pride. Was my everything enough? Or would that beautiful, foreign cake somehow overshadow it all? Their life together was a tapestry of joyful small moments, and Grace embraced her role as a wife with a happiness that sometimes, in her quietest thoughts, felt like a fragile thing she needed to protect. The happiness seemed real, but the mystery of it all, the unanswered question of why Grace and Reggie's connection was so intense and so sudden, lingered just beneath the surface of their perfect life, waiting to be unraveled. When I became pregnant with my son, a secret hope cradled beneath my heart, I slipped into the shiny bronze two-piece suit I had crafted with my own hands and a cream long-sleeved blouse to accentuate it. The fabric whispered against my skin, a creation born from Grace's effortless flair and my mother's patient guidance. It was more than clothing. It was a second scan of ambition and love, every seam stitched tight with dreams of what could be. As I smoothed the jacket over the gentle curve of my belly, I felt the weight of my own promise, the fervent belief that I could create, I could contribute, I could weave joy into the very fabric of this day. Alone in the hushed stillness, I breathed deeply. Outside, the world was stirring, preparing for the union of two souls, but in here, it was just me, my child, and the hum of quiet magnificence. I imagined that distant church bells were tolling, a solemn sound that should have felt heavy. Instead, I found myself humming a soft, defiant melody against the gravity of the moment. My thoughts were with Grace, her elegance, her radiance, and how her happiness seemed to thread through mine, not just intertwined, but pulling it taut. It was a beautiful tension, a feeling so intense it bordered on foreboding. This joy was almost too perfect to hold. Though I stood apart, unable to witness her walk down the aisle in the beautiful dress I too had worn a few years before, I felt her joy like a current in the air. She was adorned in sunlight and love, and though I missed the moment, my spirit was there, woven into the very fabric of the day. My connection was poured into every slice of cake, every savory bite, every glass of punch, carrying the flavor of my devotion. As I arranged the final pastel decorations, which swayed gently in the breeze, it felt as though the room itself was nodding in approval, not just of the beauty we created, but of the love that hummed beneath the surface. When the guests arrived, their laughter and conversation filled the space, and I knew they were tasting more than food, they were tasting essence. The essence of friendship, of commitment, of memory shared and new beginnings promised. Each flavor told a story. Each aroma carried a secret only Grace and I truly understood. And as the clinking of glasses rose like a melody and joy echoed through the room, I would feel it, deeper than pride, stronger than nostalgia. This was more than a wedding. It was a testament. A quiet, powerful reminder that love, when given without condition, is the most potent magic of all. And though my hands were stained with fruits and my feet ached from standing, my heart felt entirely, utterly full. Pregnancy, a time of joy. A few months after the wedding, Grace shared news that sent ripples of pure light through our world. She was pregnant. The announcement wasn't just happy, it was brilliant, like a sudden burst of color in a world she already made bright. This was more than a milestone. It was the ultimate language of her and Reggie's love, a silent vow spoken in the promise of new life. In the hushed moments spent rocking a fragile infant to sleep at the hospital, Grace would sometimes pause, one hand supporting a tiny back, the other resting on the gentle curve of her own belly. In those still points, she felt a profound, almost haunting connection to the very essence of caring. Life's fragility and its fierce beauty pressed in on her from all sides. Her nursing instincts sharpened. Every cry felt more personal, every tiny grip on her finger felt like a message. She realized the love she'd always had for babies wasn't just professional, it was primal. It was blooming inside her now, taking root, destined to rewrite her entire story. People often wondered how she juggled both the intense demands of the wards at the Joseph N. France General Hospital and the quiet, gathering storm of pregnancy, preparing her for motherhood. They called it grace, a steady dedication. But those who looked closer saw it wasn't balanced, it was expansion. Her capacity to care didn't split between roles, it multiplied, stretching effortlessly to envelop her patients, her family, and the unseen future waiting for her. Her passion for nursing and her love for her own child were not just merging, they were becoming the same thing, a single, powerful force, a life of purpose, and though she didn't know it yet, that force would soon be tested in ways she could never have imagined. Chapter 13, August 1st, 1991. August 1st, 1991. A date etched not in ink, but in memory, sharp and permanent. The morning began drenched in honey-gold sunlight, full of that peculiar quiet hope that belongs only to expectant mothers. I can still imagine that I hear the echo of Grace's laughter, lighter and brighter than I'd ever heard it. I can still imagine seeing the way her hand rested on the curve of her belly, a gentle, constant caress as she whispered secrets of joy to the little life growing inside, a secret world of dreams, unfolding just beneath her heart. She had chosen a name. It was more than a label. It was an invocation, a promise whispered to the future. It was also an invitation to a world we were all so sure would be brilliant, kind, and bursting with love. We had no idea the sun was already beginning to set. We didn't feel the shadow gathering at the edge of that perfect, golden day. We just felt hopeful that all would be well. We believed in it completely. The phone's ring cut through the stillness of my morning rituals, a sharp, shrill sound that felt like a warning. It was Reggie. His voice was strained, a thin wire of urgency stretched to its breaking point. She's in labor. He breathed, the words less than an announcement and more as a plea, infused with a trembling fear that instantly seized my own heart. The fragile tranquility of the day was shattered. I moved on instinct, racing to the hospital with a pulse thundering in my ears. The air itself felt charged, thick with the palpable energy of new life, but it was tinged now with a metallic hint of dread. This was it, the moment we had been waiting for. Yet with every heartbeat that rang with anticipation, another whispered, a question hung in our preconscious minds, a single, silent note of fear hanging in the balance. Grace's life was giving birth to a new beginning, but beginnings are fragile, and some are born under a shadow. As I ran through the hospital's doors, my footsteps echoed like gunshots in the unnaturally silent, pre-dawn hallways. The world had shrunk to this single path, each step a hammer blow of urgency toward a moment that we had dreamed of, a moment that was already slipping away. But the scene that greeted me was wrong, dead wrong. The nurses, who usually offered smiles as warm as sunlight, now moved with a stiff, grim efficiency. Their faces were closed-off masks, their eyes avoiding mine. The air, which should have been buzzing with joyful anticipation, was cold and still, heavy with a sterile dread that made it hard to breathe. My heart didn't just sink, it was torn from my chest and plunged into an icy abyss. Then came the words, each one a sharp, brutal punch. The baby is breech. We have to take her to the theater. Right now. A cesarean. The word echoed, no longer a medical term, but a sentence. This was nothing like the gentle, powerful birth Grace had dreamed of. This was cold steel, bright lights, and imminent danger. This was a crisis. A raw, primal fear, the kind you feel in your bones, crawled up my throat. My prayers were silent screams, a desperate inferno raging inside me. I stumbled toward the wall payphone, my hands shaking so badly that the numbers blurred. I fumbled the coin, my breath catching in ragged sobs. I clutched the cold, hard plastic receiver like it was the edge of a cliff, my only grip on a reality that was spinning out of control. And then a crackle on the line and a voice, Pastor Kenny Mitchell's voice. It was a deep, steady anchor in the roaring tempest of my terror. Pastor Kenny Mitchell's voice deepened over the line, steadying almost against the panic surrounding us. Not only did he offer words of comfort, he prayed. Right then, right there, his petition rose with a tangible power, a shield thrown over the unfolding emergency. He prayed for grace, for steady hands, for wisdom for the doctors, for protection over my sister and the child fighting to enter the world backward. He assured me, his tone leaving no room for doubt, that everything was going to be okay, not because medicine was infallible, not because luck was on our side, but because God was in the room, even in the theater, especially there. He trusted God. And in that moment, trembling and terrified, I trusted too. I trusted him. I trusted the prayer. I held on to that promise like it was the only oxygen left in the room. His unwavering faith was a lifeline, the only solid thing in a world that was crumbling around me. I did not even get to see them as they wheeled my sister away into the bright, white room to focus on the future that had never felt more terrifying or unreal. But I felt that everything was going to be okay. I told myself, God will hear Pastor Kenny's prayers. I can still hear Pastor Kenny Mitchell's voice today, not as a memory, but as an echo that has never faded. It wasn't just sound, it was substance. It deepened over the line, a calm, steady force holding back the tide of panic threatening to drown us all. He didn't just offer words of comfort. He went to battle. Right then, right there, his prayer cut through the sterile hospital air. This powerful, tangible petition felt like a shield being raised over my sister. He prayed for grace, for the surgeon's hands to be guided by divine wisdom, for protection over her and the child who was entering the world, fighting an uphill battle. And I remember how he assured me. His tone left no room for doubt. It wasn't a hollow, it'll be fine. It was a declaration. Everything was going to be okay. Not because of science alone, not because of chance, but because God was already in that operating room. Even there. Especially there. He trusted God. I trusted him too. I trusted the prayer. I held on to that promise too. After the prayer, I stepped away to gather my thoughts, my soul clinging to a single, sacred belief that grace would soon meet grace, that my sister would hold her miracle child. All this fear would melt into memory. Convinced everything was now held in God's hands, I slipped out of the hospital, leaving behind those sterile white walls that seemed to pulse with silent anxiety. The outside air felt different, still charged, but quieter. Home was only a short walk away, and as I moved down the familiar path, each step felt weighted, solemn. My heartbeat was strong and confident, fueled not by fear, but by a stubborn, swelling faith. I truly believed all would have been well. Then a simple human sound broke the solemn silence. My stomach growled, a raw reminder of life's basic rhythms. Even in this sacred wait, the body asks to be fed. So I turned toward home to prepare a meal, a simple act that felt, in that moment, like its own kind of prayer. A quiet offering made in the space between miracle and mystery. As I stood over the stove, stirring a pot of whatever I could find, my mind slipped through time. I saw her, my sister, glowing and radiant long before Reggie, fierce and unshaken by tempests. I remembered her during the hurricane years ago, when the wind screamed like a furious animal outside the hospital windows. Yet there she stood, steady as stone, tending to the most vulnerable while the world raged. Anyone with sense had taken shelter, but not Grace. She became a pillar in chaos, a calm eye in the storm. She loved nursing. She also loved babies. Today, after all those nights of courage, all those days of giving, she would finally meet her own. We had dreamed of this day, held our breath for it, celebrated it before it even came. And now it was here. I also remembered how every single day during my own pregnancy, Grace visited my home. Without fail, she would gently place her hands on my swollen stomach, as if blessing the life growing within. Then she would open a Bible and read aloud to my unborn son. She believed with that unwavering certainty of hers that even though he couldn't see her, he could hear her. She was convinced that the rhythm of Scripture, the soft strength of her voice flowing into the quiet darkness where he waited, would plant a seed, not just of faith, but of love, a love for the words, for the reading, for the sacred stillness she brought into the room. Every visit was a ritual, every verse a gift. Grace showered my son with the sound of hope long before he ever drew breath. There were no ifs, no buts, no maybes about Grace's love for babies. It was a pure, specific, and gentle truth, as genuine as her voice, and as lasting as the words she left echoing in his soul. I also remember how, each day when she visited, Grace would make her way straight to my kitchen. It was her little ritual. Without a word, she'd lift the lid of whatever pot was simmering on the stove, breathing in the steam with a smile that felt like a quiet compliment. She loved my cooking, really loved it, and that small, daily gesture meant more to me than any praise could. But not everyone saw it that way. My spouse at that time, Stanley Hodge, my son's father, would often complain. He didn't like that she came straight from the hospital, still in her uniform, and went right to the pots. She's bringing germs into this house, he would say, his voice tight with concern. She shouldn't be opening the food like that. I understood his worry. It was practical, protective. But to me, it was just Grace. Her uniform wasn't just a carrier of germs. It was a badge of the care she poured into others all day. And her love for my food felt like an extension of that same nurturing spirit. So I'd just smile, shake my head, and let her lift that lid one more time. Some things were simply worth the risk. I closed my eyes for just a moment, letting a wave of warmth and memory wash over me. I held tightly to the image of Grace, her kindness, her steadiness, her unwavering love. Today was her day, the day her deepest dream would finally come true. She would deliver her own baby, hold her own child. God would keep them safe. How could he not? She had spent her life pouring love into the smallest of things, tenderly cooing at infants or playing peekaboo, cradling them with a gentle assurance that seemed to quiet the whole world. Watching her had always filled my heart with hope. She was going to be an incredible mother, nurturing, devoted, radiant. And yet, in those days, I'll admit, babies unsettled me. Their cries felt like unanswered questions. Their fragility, their overwhelming need, it left me hesitant, unsure. I preferred children when they could speak, when they could tell you what they felt with words instead of whimpers. I struggled with the beautiful, bewildering chaos of newborns. However, Grace understood that language. She heard meaning in every murmur. And today, she would finally hold a conversation of her own. Therefore, armored with a frail confidence, I stirred the pot with a kind of fierce devotion, watching as each small bubble rose and burst, like a silent prayer released into the air, pleading for her safety, for her joy, for the dream she was so close to holding. Please, God, I whispered into the steam, grant her this favor. The words of Pastor Kenny Mitchell returned to me, not as a memory, but as a presence, a steady, soothing melody woven into the rhythm of my stirring. Everything is in God's hands. It was more than a phrase, it was an anchor. My heart held tightly to those words, a lifeline thrown into the churning sea of my fears. With every turn of the spoon, I felt like I was willing strength into her, fortifying grace for the moment she would finally embrace her child. I could almost see it, Grace cradling her baby, a new light glowing in her eyes, a world of warmth and laughter unfolding around them. Slowly, my own anxieties began to loosen, dissolving like salt into the simmering broth. This wasn't just food I was making, it was an offering, a testament of love, an act of faith, a quiet belief in a protection greater than any of us. The phone call. As the aromatic steam rose around me, I whispered one more prayer for strength, for safety, for the fragile miracle of new life. For a moment, I felt it, a soft, reassuring presence, cradling my fears like something holy. Yes, I told myself, all truly is in his hands. And in my heart, that was enough. But then the phone rang. The sound cut through the stillness, sharp and invasive. I answered, and the voice on the other end was one I recognized immediately. It was her doctor, the same doctor who had delivered my son just 1 year before. Her own obstetrician was on vacation, and so the duty fell to the same doctor who had delivered me 11 months earlier. His tone was low, measured, stripped of all warmth. We were having trouble putting her to sleep, he said, his words clinical, careful. I didn't let him finish. A cold dread seized me, quick and instinctive. The question tore from me raw, abrupt, almost accusatory. And what's she dead? A pause, thin and infinite. Then 2 words followed. They were final but straightforward. She's dead. The words didn't even feel like words. They were stones dropped into still water, falling slowly, then sinking deep, dragging everything down with them. The air in the room grew thick, heavy, and impossible to breathe. Time didn't stop, it folded, collapsed in on itself, warping around that one crushing truth. She's dead. The world went silent. The prayer still on my lips turned to ash. At that moment, it felt like the universe had a way of twisting faith into agony, with the hope of deliverance pulsing in my veins. The second phone call. That day, the world didn't just change, it shattered into a million sharp, silent pieces. My hands shook as I picked up the phone. Each digit I dialed felt heavy, wrong, as if I were betraying the sunlight still streaming through the windows. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic, trapped rhythm of dread. My mother answered on the second ring. Her voice was warm, brightened by the tropical Virgin Island breeze flowing through her open window. She was smiling, I could hear it, blissfully unaware that the world had already ended and that I was the one about to pull the ground from beneath her feet. That call, it was the most painful thing I have ever had to do. How do you form the words that will break your mother's heart? How do you speak the unbearable? I had to tell my mom that her favorite daughter was gone. Grace had passed away during the delivery of her first and only child. Mammy, I wish I could say this differently, but the words tore from my throat, each one ragged and heavy with a sorrow which I could barely hold. Through the phone line, I could hear the distant, rhythmic crash of waves behind her, carefree, beautiful, a cruel contrast to the storm of anguish I was unleashing into her peaceful world. She fell silent. A deep, hollow silence. It was as if the entire universe had paused, holding its breath alongside her. I thought that my younger sister, Debbie, who the day before this tragic incident traveled to Tortola, BVI, with hopes of meeting her parents in Virgin Gorda, was nearby. I believed that she might have been skimming her hands over the flaking paint of old beach chairs, her little giggles lighting up the salty air, and now there was my mother, standing in the warmth of the tropical sun, her heart full of love and her mind always gently tilted toward worry. In one moment, she was soaking in simple happiness. In the next, she was absorbing the shock of my words, each one landing like a weight she should never have had to carry. I could almost feel the sun on her skin through the phone. I could almost see her smile fade, her world crumbling in the very place that was supposed to be her escape. Paradise had just become the backdrop to our shared devastation. As I spoke the unbearable words, I could almost see the cruel contrast unfold. My mother standing under a sun-drenched sky, surrounded by the easy rhythm of island life, while here, inside me, a cold and unforgiving wind howled with a ferocity that threatened to swallow me whole. I listened helplessly as her breath caught, as the light drained from her voice, replaced by a silence so deep that it ached. The distance between us had never felt greater. She, on those warm, bright shores, and I, anchored in a gathering storm that I could not escape from. I don't remember what she said, only the sound of disbelief, the shattered silence. I wished more than anything that I could shield her, that I could wrap her in gentleness, in softer words, in some kind of mercy that might ease the blow. But life is a tempest, unpredictable and raw, and sometimes, without warning, it cuts straight through our happiness, sharp and sudden as a blade falling out of the sky. When we finally hung up, I called Curtis St. Just a family friend, a cousin to Grace, someone who would understand the depth of what we had lost. Then I simply stood there, hollowed and still, trying to grasp how tragedy could feel so distant and yet carve itself so deeply into your soul. That day, life didn't just feel fragile. It felt like a breath on glass. One moment, warmth. The next, cold. Joy had turned to despair in the space between heartbeats, and nothing would ever feel certain again. With steps so heavy they felt like anchors, I made my way to a neighbor's home. My voice was barely a whisper when I asked for a ride to find Reggie. He was working high atop a roof, unaware that the world as he knew it had already ended. The sun beat down on the worksite, men moved with purpose, hammers rang out, life continued. But our driver didn't wait, didn't soften. He got out of his vehicle and shouted up toward the sky, his voice raw and unguarded. Reggie, boy, come down now. Your wife dead. The words didn't just hang in the air, they shattered it. Time froze. The ringing of hammers ceased. All that remained was a silence so deep it felt like a wound. Shortly after, some of Reggie's coworkers turned on the driver, their faces tight with disbelief and anger. You couldn't think, one said, his voice trembling. Shouting up at a man on a roof like that, he could have fallen. He could have broken his neck right there. But the damage was done. The words were already out, already carving their way into Reggie's soul. And in that moment, standing there under the harsh, hottest sun, grief didn't descend, it erupted. The raw shock of that moment is forever etched into me, the sound of those brutal words hanging in the hot, still air. Each syllable landed like a hammer against my already shattered heart. I stood frozen in the background, my breath trapped somewhere deep in my throat, as the world seemed to tilt wildly off its axis. All I could see was Reggie. The joyous man who had climbed up that ladder just hours earlier was now descending it slowly, mechanically, as if each rung took immense effort. His face was a mask unreadable, stripped of all light, all future. The eager anticipation of fatherhood had vanished, replaced by something hollow, something stunned. And as he stepped onto solid ground, the weight of what we had lost settled over all of us, heavy, silent, and absolute. In the numbing chaos that followed, I moved as if I were in a dream, a surreal, slow motion world where nothing looked or felt real. We drove to the hospital on autopilot, swallowed by a grief so thick it muffled sound, thought, and even time. The hospital, once a place of hope, of new beginnings, now felt cold, silent, hollowed out. A place where miracles were supposed to happen had become a chamber of loss. I was guided into a large, dark, open area where Grace lay beneath a cascade of white sheets, too still, too quiet. The stark clinical whiteness of the sheet covering her clashed violently with the darkness swelling inside me. Her strength, so tangible just hours before, now felt like a faint echo in silence. This wasn't the radiant mother-to-be we had all envisioned, full of life and anticipation. This was something else, something final. Her laughter lingered only in memory. Her warmth, now gone. Now in its place, there was a stillness so deep that it felt like a language none of us knew how to speak. Time dissolved in that hospital that day. The world outside kept turning, cars passed, people laughed, the sun set, all of it oblivious to the suffocating grief that wrapped around us. We had crossed into a different realm, one suspended in sorrow, where the bright future we'd imagined for Grace curdled into something quiet and still. In the days that followed, life didn't just move on, it twisted. What should have been pastel-colored baby showers became funeral plans. What should have been sleepless nights soothed by a newborn's hungry cry became hollow silences, broken only by tears. We prepared to bury the mother instead of celebrating the child. Joy had been replaced by memory, expectation by emptiness. And through it all, lingered the echo of what should have been a gentle coo that never came, a lullaby that would never be sung. Chapter 14, It Should Have Been Me. Before the funeral, I stepped into the hushed solemnity of the church, and my heart was already heavy with grief. As I moved through the somber crowd, a woman leaned close, her voice a venomous whisper in my ear. "I'm so sorry about your sister. It should have been you." Her words didn't just sting, they pierced through me, sharp and cruel, magnifying the sorrow I already carried. What she never could have known was that, in the deepest, most hidden parts of my soul, I had already wished the very same thing. I felt with a painful certainty that God had made a mistake, an unforgivable error. He had taken the wrong one. Grace was everything I was not, neither gentle, beautiful, talented, quiet, nor obedient. She carried peace within her like a light, offering calm to everyone she met. She was better than me, kinder, purer, more full of love. Losing her carved a void in our world that I believed I could never fill. For years, I carried the crushing weight of survivor's guilt. I questioned why I remained, why her light was extinguished while I walked in shadows. That moment at her funeral didn't just compound my grief, it fractured my faith and shattered my sense of worth, sending me on a long and lonely path towards something like healing. This chapter speaks not only about loss, but about the silent shame, unnecessary guilt, and spiritual doubt that so often accompany profound grief. Many suffer such wounds in silence, bearing not only the absence of a loved one, but the weight of wondering why they were left behind. And the words of a stranger in a church? They became a mirror reflecting my deepest fear, one I'm only now learning to let go. For years, the thought that it should have been me was more than a feeling, it was like a truth that was engraved in my bones. It wasn't just grief, it was a constant, heavy shame that poisoned my memories and paralyzed my healing. I believed my survival was a mistake. Why was I here when Grace was the one who radiated goodness? She was kinder, gentler, more loving than I could ever be. My mind kept circling back. God had taken the wrong sister. That belief didn't just hurt, it actively prevented me from healing. How could I allow myself to feel better, to laugh, or to move forward when I felt I didn't deserve the life I had? Every moment of peace felt like a betrayal of her memory. I was trapped in my own pain, punishing myself for being the one who remained. And because of that, I couldn't talk about her. For so long, her name was caught in my throat. To speak of Grace was to instantly trigger that crushing guilt. If I tried to share a happy memory, it was immediately followed by the silent whisper, and it should have been her, not you. So I stayed silent. I thought I was protecting her memory, but really, I was protecting myself from the storm of shame that came with remembering. It took me years to untangle the love from the guilt, to slowly realize that my death wouldn't have honored hers. I had to learn that grieving Grace didn't require destroying myself. I started to understand that I could miss her without blaming myself for living. Now, when I speak her name, it isn't because the pain is gone. It's because my love for her has finally grown louder than my guilt. I can talk about my sister now not as a saint on a pedestal, but as a real person I loved deeply, and that feels like its own kind of healing. The weight of bearing grief. For years, I could not sing the hymns. Each note felt like a betrayal, a melody that belonged to her, to a faith that felt broken. The songs we once shared now echoed with silence that only I could hear. For years, I could not bear the sight of the colors, the muted tones of the hearse that carried her away, the somber shades of loss that painted the world in sorrow. They were not just colors, they were memories I couldn't face. I can talk about my sister now not as a saint on a pedestal, but as a real person I loved deeply, and that feels like its own kind of healing. For years, I turned away from her photograph. Not because I didn't want to see her smile, but because the weight of her absence felt too heavy to hold. The joy in her eyes only magnified the hollow space she left behind. For years, I buried my grief where no one could see it, hidden beneath responsibility, silence, and the unspoken belief that something so wrong could never be made right. I wrapped my pain in quietness. I carried it alone. And in the stillness, I kept asking, how could this be right? How could the world keep turning without her light? Some losses change you. They become part of you. And healing doesn't mean forgetting. It means learning how to carry love without collapsing beneath the weight of the loss. Chapter 15, Miracle and Mystery. A promise named Karis. In the soft, dim light of the incubator at the hospital, we gathered around the fragile form of Karis. A wave of bittersweet joy crumbled through us. She was here, 2 weeks overdue, yet breathing alive. The air hung thick with emotion, a delicate and painful balance between overwhelming grief and trembling gratitude. This was the little girl Grace had dreamed of, whispered to, loved deeply during those early months of pregnancy. With each passing day, she had wrapped her heart around Karis, weaving a bond as intricate and intense as a tapestry. Though small, Karis radiated a fragile beauty that held us captive. Her tiny fingers curled slightly, as if holding onto a dream only she and her mother shared. Her delicate features, marked by the struggle of her arrival, still held a quiet spark, a flicker of life insisting on being seen. I couldn't look away. Here was the miracle Grace had fought for. A heartbeat in a room still echoing with loss. A beginning where there should have been only an end. As family and friends gathered in the quiet room, a gentle hush fell over us, not of absence, but of presence. Love filled the space, palpable and warm, holding back the shadows of grief just enough for us to breathe. They encircled Karis, their voices soft, their touches tender, marveling at the miracle before them. Whispers of encouragement floated like blessings around the incubator, hearts swelling with joy for this little life even as they ached for the ones so tragically lost. It was a bittersweet symphony, laughter woven through tears, hope braided with sorrow. We took turns going closer to her inside the room to get a closer look at Karis, touching her as if she were made of light and memory, afraid that if we let go, some part of Grace might slip away, too. Yet in every tiny sigh, every movement of her small hands, we felt it. Her mother's spirit lived here. Karis was more than a baby. She was a promise. A dream realized, a living, breathing testament of the love Grace left behind. Pastor Kenny Mitchell came to visit Karis, and his presence alone felt like a salve for our raw, wounded hearts. He didn't fill the silence with empty words. Instead, he held it with us. Then, in a voice both gentle and grounding, he offered a prayer. He spoke blessings over Karis, each one woven in Grace's honor, reminding us that even here, in the crushing weight of loss, hope could still take root. His words fell softly around us like a warm blanket, wrapping our shattered spirits in something that almost felt like peace. And in that moment, I understood, truly understood, the profound power of a name chosen in love, Karis, a name which Grace had chosen. She would not only carry her mother's legacy, but also become its living embodiment, a symbol of resilience. A quiet but unbreakable light in the shadows we now had to walk through, a light named, blessed, and already loved beyond measure. A bittersweet symphony. In the days that followed, Karis became the quiet center of our shattered world, a small, breathing anchor in a sea of grief. She was delicate, yes, but there was a resilience in her, a quiet insistence that life would, somehow, go on. We marked time not in hours, but in her tiny movements, the way her fingers curled trustingly around ours, the flutter of her eyelids as she sensed someone near, the soft rhythm of her breath as she slept. In those small, sacred moments, something unexpected began to stir, a fragile but stubborn sense of joy, kindling softly amid the ache of loss. She was more than our last living connection to Grace. She was a promise that tomorrow is still worth living, and a promise of laughter that would one day feel real again, of love that would endure even beyond heartbreak. With every day that passed, and every time we held her close, we weren't just remembering Grace. We were weaving her memory into a new story. One where grief and grace could coexist. One where Karis would grow, not in the shadow of loss, but in the light of a love that refused to end. One day, as I stood watching Karis sleep, her chest rising and falling in a rhythm too gentle for such a heavy world, my mind began to wander. A quiet rush of gratitude washed over me. We had lost a mother, a partner, a friend, yet here, breathing softly before us, was an extraordinary gift, a living emblem of hope. In her fragile form lay all the dreams Grace had tenderly nurtured, and in our hearts now lived the solemn responsibility to honor those dreams, to raise Karis surrounded by the love, laughter, and joy her mother had cherished so deeply. But with that gratitude also came the memory of another day, another moment that would forever haunt me, the day I had to call my mom. It was the most painful call I have ever made. Although it was a long-distance call, the actual distance that I felt was not miles, but in the chasm between the joy she still felt and the sorrow I was about to deliver. Telling my mother that her favorite daughter was gone, that Grace had passed during the delivery of her first and only child, shattered something in both of us. In that moment, I felt utterly alone, abandoned even by God. Delivering that news was more than difficult. It felt like a betrayal of the love we all shared. My mother's grief was a profound reflection of the unimaginable loss we were all facing, and bearing witness to her pain deepened my own. Yet here was Karis, asleep, peaceful, unaware of the heartache that surrounded her arrival. In her, we found not an answer to our grief, but a reason to keep loving, keep living, keep honoring the memory of a woman whose light had been extinguished far too soon. When joy and sorrow meet. The day my mom, my youngest sister, and stepdad returned from Virgin Gorda was meant to be special, a reunion, a moment of togetherness after so much heartache. But as I stood there, smiling through the weight in my chest, I knew I couldn't allow myself to truly feel what was breaking inside me. Someone had to be strong for my mom. Someone had to hold the pieces together. So I buried my own sorrow, locking it away where no one could see. I didn't share my grief with anyone. I carried it silently, like a stone no one knew was there. Memories of my sister, her laughter, her kindness, the light she brought into our lives, became both a comfort and a quiet torment. We were navigating this painful journey together, yet I felt utterly alone in my sadness. It wasn't until I left for Cameron University that I finally began to understand what grief really was, not something to hide or fear, but a complex, individualized, and deeply personal process. Away from the eyes of my family, I slowly allowed myself to feel what I had locked away for so many years. I learned that being strong doesn't mean burying your pain. It means having the courage to face it, to speak its name, and to carry it without letting it carry you. Learning to grieve. My sister's passing left a sorrow so deep that it lingered for years, an ache that became part of who I am. Even now, on September 18th, 2025, after 34 long years, as I sit down to rewrite this manuscript, the pain rushed back with a rawness that took my breath away. It became so overwhelming that I had to pause, to grant myself permission to simply feel it. I set the pages aside, allowing time and tears in their space before I could return. In that stillness, I found myself reflecting on the moment I told my mom, the crushing weight of those words, the way they seemed to fracture something inside me. In the early years, all I felt was grief. Losing Grace carved a permanent place of absence in my heart, one that shaped my life in ways I was only beginning to understand. Before I attended Cameron University, I ignored my pain. I wore strength like armor, not realizing that grief, when buried, only grows heavier. It isolated me, creating a silent, solitary path even when I was surrounded by others who loved and missed her just as deeply. It was at Cameron that I finally learned how to grieve. There, I gained the tools and insights to integrate loss into life, not as something to hide, but as a truth to carry. I learned to honor Grace's memory without being consumed by the sadness of her absence. Now, I write about Grace not only as an act of remembrance, but as an act of art. I am sharing this story with family and friends, hoping it becomes a beautiful testament to her life, a way to keep her spirit vividly and lovingly alive. Additionally, I've learned something else, that sharing sadness and memories with someone you trust isn't a sign of weakness. It's a decisive, essential step toward healing. Our stories need witnesses. Our grief needs a voice, and our love deserves to be told. Conclusion. This chapter unfolds the profound tragedy of Grace's passing during childbirth. This moment shattered our family's joy into unimaginable grief. Yet, amid the despair, her daughter, Karis, emerges as a fragile yet powerful emblem of hope, a living promise of the love and dreams Grace left behind. It is a testament to the painful duality of loss and legacy, exploring the weight of sorrow, the isolation of silent grief, and the slow, arduous path toward healing through memory, story, and the unwavering belief that love endures even the most profound loss. Chapter 16, Bonding with my younger sister. From that moment at Springfield Cemetery, Debbie and I just got each other. We built our own world out of inside jokes, secret looks, and whispered conversations, a united front against whatever life threw our way. It was us against the world. We made a silent pact. We'd always have each other's backs. No questions asked. Every day was a new adventure, messy and loud and totally ours. We became a package deal, two halves of the same crazy whole. Amid the chaos of growing up, Grace was more than just my big sister. She was also my best friend. My person. She could read my mind with a single glance. With her around, I never felt alone. But that's why it was so terrifying. When she was there, everything was brighter, funnier, better. But the second she was gone, it was like the Wi-Fi cut out. Everything just went quiet and gray, and I'd feel this ache for my favorite person to come back. Our sister Grace's situation was this huge, scary thing we couldn't control in the middle of all that. Debbie, my younger sister, became my anchor and my lifeline. We faced the real life chaos together, a two-person team fueled by pure loyalty and inside jokes. Every time we cracked up was like a silent pact, a promise that no matter how hard things got, we always held on to each other. Our bond was our superpower, and honestly, that was kind of terrifying and amazing all at once. That's when I realized that our bond was a complicated mix of total safety and sheer terror. We were each other's support system, using our own fears to prop the other one up. We weren't just trying to protect our mom, we were protecting each other from everything that sought to tear us apart. In that unbreakable alliance, we found our own kind of peace, proving what it really means to be inseparable. Walking home from the Springfield Cemetery, where we'd just buried Grace, the late sun threw long, dark shadows across our path. Everything looked the same, but felt completely different, like the world had shifted off its axis. Every step was heavy, like we were walking through wet cement. Debbie and I moved side by side, not saying a word. The space between us wasn't empty, it was filled with a deafening silence, louder than any scream. What could we even say? The grief was a physical weight in our chests, stealing our breath and our words. We just kept walking, together in the quiet, trying to figure out how to exist in a world that suddenly felt so broken. The air was heavy and hard to breathe, like our sadness had a physical weight, pushing down on us. We held on to each other, shoulders shaking, the world just a blur through our tears. In that moment, nothing else existed, just the raw, overwhelming pain that threatened to swallow us whole. With every sob, it felt like we were breaking. We didn't need to say anything. Our hearts were having a conversation of their own, a silent scream of shared hurt. Every breath was a reminder that Grace was gone, and the empty space that she left behind felt huge and impossible. We had to stop a few times, just letting the sadness hit us like a wave we had to ride out. We held each other tighter, finding a strange comfort in the fact that we weren't falling apart alone. In those horrible, gut-wrenching moments, I understood something. Love is what holds you together even when you feel like you're breaking into a million pieces. The world seemed to be drained of color around us, everything fading to a dull gray. Each step made the road home feel longer and harder. The usual sounds, leaves rustling, birds calling, were just muffled background noises to the drumming of our own broken hearts. After what felt like forever, the blurry shape of our house finally appeared. But even as we got closer, a cold truth settled in our stomachs. Home wouldn't feel like home anymore. The silence there was different now, heavy and empty where laughter used to be. The memories that once felt warm now carried a sharp sting. We stopped at my mom's door, where I had to leave Debbie. For a second, we just held hands tighter, one silent squeeze saying everything we couldn't. I'm here. We'll get through this. Together. No words needed. Our bond was stronger than the pain. And in that moment, even through all the hurt, there was a small spark of hope, a quiet reminder that even on the darkest days, we wouldn't have to face them alone. Feeling alone, but not without each other. Walking away from my mom's house, every step felt heavier, like I was dragging weights. The short path to my own place, less than a minute away, suddenly felt like a mile. With each second, the distance from Debbie made the ache in my chest grow sharper. The sun had set, but I barely noticed. The world felt even more colorless. I drifted down the empty street toward my house, already knowing what was waiting for me, a deep, heavy silence. It was going to swallow me whole, like a room no one had entered in years. Power UPS and glitches. I pushed open the front door, and the silence hit me first. It was the kind of quiet that felt heavy, as if the world had hit mute. My heart was still thumping from the day, a chaotic drumbeat of grief and confusion. I just wanted to collapse. But then I heard it. A tiny, determined thump 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 from the living room. My son, my 11-month-old sidekick. I rounded the corner, and there he was, walking towards me like a tiny explorer conquering a mountain. His face lit up when he saw me, a full-on, gum-showing, world-changing grin. It was like someone flipped a switch, flooding my dark world with a blinding, pure light. This kid was my real-life respawn point, my beacon in a seriously messed up game. Just looking at him, knowing I was his entire universe, should have been enough to vanquish every bad feeling. And for a second, it was. But then the storm hit. The image of my sister, Grace, flashed in my mind, her laugh that could turn a boring day into an inside joke, the way she always had my back. The ache of missing her was a physical pain, a hollow space right in my chest. So I did the only thing I could. I scooped up my little beacon of hope, feeling his small, warm weight against me, a living, breathing shield against the void. I held him tight, this tiny human who needed a hero, while I fought the battle inside myself, desperately trying to be one. The mission wasn't over yet. I tried to lose myself in the mom life algorithm: diaper, bath, bottle, play, repeat. And for a while, it worked. My son's giggles were like power-ups, each one charging my broken spirit a little more. Bath time wasn't just a bath, it was a splashdown mission in the kitchen sink, and I was the command center chief, dodging tidal waves from a tiny, cackling astronaut. His smile was my personal supernova, blinding and powerful enough to burn through the fog in my head. It almost convinced me I was okay. But grief is a glitch in the system. It hits you when your guard is down. I'd be building a block tower for the 1,000th time, and a memory would flash, Grace, stealing my fries and laughing, Grace, hyping me up before a scary date. Out of nowhere, a cold, staticky feeling would creep in, freezing me solid for a heartbeat. The questions would hit like a jump scare. Would she have made the dumbest faces to make him laugh? Would she think I'm actually handling this, or would she see right through me? I was building a new world for us. Still, every extraordinary moment felt like a level I was playing without my best player. Was I even winning? Love's cheat code. I rocked my son to sleep, but my mind was racing. The quiet was a lie. Inside, it was a highlight reel of everything that should have been Grace sneaking him a bite of cookie, rolling her eyes at my mom rules, being the awesome, fun aunt she was born to be. The ache was a physical gut punch. I buried my face in his hair, taking a deep breath of that magic baby scent, like cookies and calm. It was my anchor, my hard reset button. For a second, it cleared the noise. My heart was a battlefield. Joy for my son was winning, but I also felt sorrow for the loss of my sister. In the total silence of our moonlit room, I finally let the armor crack. Tears I'd been locking down all night escaped, tracing hot paths down my face and disappearing into his tiny, soft hair. This was it. The most brutal, beautiful cheat code of life, love and loss, leveled up together. And in that raw, quiet moment, I made a silent vow to both of them. My mission was clear. I would channel every bit of Grace's legendary energy, her laugh, her loyalty, her zero F's given confidence, and I would fuel our journey with it. We wouldn't just walk this path, my son and I. We would blaze through it. 2 players, 1 heart, unlocking the next level together. The unbreakable celebration. The decision to host my niece's christening party was made with love and purpose. It was a sacred vow. Additionally, it was a promise to honor a new beginning for a special child. Her mother, my sister, Grace, had passed away, and I felt a deep responsibility to ensure this baby was celebrated. The plans were set, my spouse was informed, and our relatives were all joyfully anticipating the event. I had the perfect place in mind, the preschool I owned and operated on the first floor of our home. It was a space brimming with joy, a place where I nurtured young futures. It also held a profound, bittersweet memory, as it was the very same hall where, just over a year before, we had celebrated my sister's wedding reception. Hosting her daughters, christening there felt not just right but destined. However, with only an hour to spare before the event started, the foundation of my plan shattered. My spouse, in a cold and firm declaration, forbade me from bringing anyone into our home or into my preschool. The irony was a sharp sting. I was the one paying the rent for the entire building. But financial authority meant nothing in the face of his adamant anger. He knew guests would arrive soon, and his opposition was absolute. I was faced with an impossible standoff. The choice was clear. I could either surrender to his veto, betraying the memory of my sister and the joy of my niece, or I could find a way to uphold my promise against all odds. My resolve was crystallized. The celebration was not going to be canceled. A new plan was formed instantly. We would move everything to my mother's home, a sanctuary not far away. What followed was a tense and hurried operation. As I carried the first loads of food, my spouse violently pushed the heavy inside kitchen door and thrust it forcefully toward me, forcing me to rush to safety. Moments later, my youngest sister, who was also helping with the transportation of the food, faced the same jarring aggression, narrowly escaping injury, simply because of a stubborn refusal. But our determination was a force that my spouse could not crush. We refused to be deterred. Despite these harrowing moments, our focus never wavered. The party was successfully held at my mother's much smaller home. Her home was filled with the very laughter and love we had fought to protect. Laughter and love filled the space, a fitting tribute to my niece. It was a testament to a family's resilience. This celebration proved that no obstacle could break a promise made from the heart. It was a powerful reminder that some commitments are too essential to break, and that no obstacle would prevent us from honoring that promise. Chapter 17: A Glitch in the World. The Cheat Code. The world went HD after the funeral, but in all the worst ways. The air wasn't just heavy, it was a solid thing, a pressure suit I had to wear 24/7. People talked, their voices buzzing like static, and I just glitched through the crowd. A ghost in my own life. Every time someone said, "Remember when Grace," it wasn't a comfort. It was a blade, sharp and precise, slicing open whatever scab was trying to form. I couldn't look at photos. To me, they weren't memories. They were altars to a past life, a universe that had suddenly kicked me out of its orbit. I kept them locked away, because staring at her face was like staring into a sun that had gone supernova and left me in permanent, freezing darkness. Hymns and hauntings. Her voice used to be the soundtrack of our house, singing hymns off-key. She'd sing these old hymns, and they didn't feel old. They felt alive, like they had wings. Now, those same songs were on a haunted playlist in my head, every note a gut punch of what was gone. The prayer I could not pray. No one knew this, but for years after Grace died, I stopped praying. What was the point? I was there when Pastor Kenny prayed with me over the payphone with a conviction that shook the room. He begged God for a safe delivery. He commanded the heavens to guide the surgeon's hands. And I believed him. I believed God would listen to him. If anyone's prayer would be answered, it would be the pastor's. But to me at that time, God didn't listen. He remained silent. He turned away. That belief didn't just break, it shattered. It exploded into a million pieces that were difficult to put back together. If God wouldn't listen to him, he certainly wouldn't listen to me. He was going to do whatever he wanted anyway, so why waste my breath? If that's what people called faith in prayer or grace, then I wanted no part of it. I was too angry, too broken, to be pieced back together by some silent, distant God. In the deepest, most secret part of my soul, I made a vow. I was going to save my breath when it came to prayer. I had stopped praying. For years, I lived a quiet contradiction. I taught my son to pray each night, and I led the children in my preschool in gentle, grateful prayers before mealtime, snacks, and naps. But when I was alone, my own prayers fell silent. In my heart, I didn't believe it made sense. How could I ask these little ones to speak to a God I felt had turned away from me? Then, many years later, a conversation with my now adult son changed everything. We found ourselves wrestling with that ancient, aching question: why does God allow bad things to happen to good people? And it was my son, the same little boy I'd taught to fold his hands and bow his head, who gently offered a new perspective. He didn't preach or simplify my pain. Instead, he shared a wiser, kinder understanding of prayer, not as a transaction, but as a relationship, not as a guarantee of no suffering, but as a source of strength within it. That talk became a turning point. His words didn't erase the years of doubt, but they quietly lit a path I thought had been lost forever. Because of him, I found the courage to begin a new journey, one of restored faith, reclaimed hope, and prayers that once again feel not just spoken, but heard. The color of a hearse. And then there was the color purple. It became my enemy. It wasn't just a color anymore. It was the exact shade of the curtains hanging inside the windows of the hearse that took her to the Springfield Cemetery. It was the bruise on my heart, visible to everyone. For years, I would see it on a stranger's shirt, a car, a flower, and my whole body would flinch. I became a vampire to that color and any shade resembling that color, avoiding it at all costs, as if ignoring the trigger could stop the pain. Time did its thing. The world kept spinning, seasons blurred together, and I'd gotten pretty good at building walls around my heart. Then, in 1993, a glitch in the system, a flicker of hope. I was chosen, one of only 10 people in the entire Federation, for a pilot program, a diploma in youth work. It was my ticket out, my distraction. Antigua State College was my new arena, and for a while I was winning. I was having a blast, finally feeling like I had a future. But the universe apparently had a different plot twist. The song that broke me. One Sunday morning, in the middle of a seemingly normal church service, it happened. Two ladies took the microphone and began to sing. Farther along we'll know all about it. It was an old hymn, a song I thought I was immune to. I was wrong. It hit me not like a memory, but like a physical force. A tidal wave of pure feeling that I didn't even realize I was still storing. Suddenly, and out of nowhere, the dam broke. Tears weren't just falling. They were cascading down my face, a flash flood of grief I'd buried deep. I was abruptly, violently pulled back into the past. The pain wasn't a dull ache anymore. It was a fresh wound, sharp and ferocious. To everyone else, I was just a woman crying in church. They had no idea about the total internal tempest, the hurricane of sorrow that one stupid song had unleashed. It shattered every single wall I'd spent 2 solid years carefully constructing. And in that raw, messy, public breakdown, I realized something huge. What was this grief thing? It wasn't just my solo mission to fail at. It was a universal experience, a secret code that, in that moment, connected me to everyone who had ever lost something. It was the worst and most powerful cheat code I'd ever unlocked. Pulling the thorn. I was a pro at dodging the truth. I perfected the art of the sidestep, swerving any conversation about grace and changing the channel on any hymn that dared to play. I had built a fortress around my memories. Well-meaning gifts became enemy fire. Someone would give me something purple, and it wasn't just a color, it was a direct hit, a pinprick that sent shockwaves through my system. Each one was a brutal reminder of the Grand Canyon-sized crater she left in my life. I would armor up with resentment, wearing it like a shield against the world. I could have kept that up forever, but the universe had one more boss level for me. The year was 2005. I was at Cameron University, ready to start a master's degree program. That's when I got the assignment that I'd been running from for over a decade, a class on death and dying. This dreaded class forced me to finally open my own story of loss. There was no more running. I had to dive headfirst into the wreckage of my own past. And in the middle of that painful archaeology, I unearthed a brutal but necessary truth. I couldn't help anyone else fix their broken pieces until I was brave enough to dig up my own. Committing to heal was like performing surgery on myself, pulling out a splinter that had been festering for years. It was agony, but it was also the first clean breath I'd taken in a long time. It was the start of the most challenging quest of my life, the path back to me. Carrying the spotlight. For me to tell this story, my story became the ultimate power-up. It was a mirror that didn't just show my pain, it reflected my strength back at me. I finally understood that life doesn't ask permission to change you. It drops boss levels when you least expect it, not to break you, but to force you to level up. And in the middle of all that chaos, I found something I thought I'd lost forever. Not just the memory of Grace, but her power. Her life wasn't just a story, it was a masterclass in being human. She was an original, a burst of kindness, creativity, and a reflection of a faith that moved mountains. Thankfully, she left me a cheat code for life: resilience. She taught me that love is a verb, not just a feeling. It's about showing up, persisting, and fiercely protecting every single moment you have with the people who matter. Her legacy isn't a ghost, it's a guidebook. Even now, Grace's light hasn't dimmed. It's my permanent glow up, my internal compass on the darkest days. Her spirit is the ultimate cheat code, proof that real love is the one thing that can't be defeated, even by the fiercest grief. Thinking about her doesn't just make me sad, it fills me with a defiant kind of pride. It's a constant reminder to stop wasting time and to live with purpose and guts. Grace's legacy isn't some old photo in a frame, it's a living, breathing pack for my soul. It's in the way I choose to be kind, in the way I fight for what's right, in the way I carry her light forward, not as a quiet memory, but as a spotlight, illuminating the path for everyone walking with me. The glitch in reality. The silence after losing Grace isn't quiet. It's a heavy, suffocating weight, and my brain just buffers, stuck on a loop, constantly rewinding to her, to Grace. Her laugh wasn't just a sound, it was one of the main tracks on the playlist of my life. How does a light that bright just abruptly vanish? The question isn't just sad, it's infuriating. It's a glitch, which I cannot fix. Why was she taken so soon? My world is like a puzzle missing its centerpiece, the most colorful, important one. Sometimes my mind tricks me. I can almost hear her voice, a familiar melody in a quiet room, pulling up memories in ultra-high definition. But when I reach them, they're like trying to hold a shadow. It's the ultimate heartbreak, having the best memories feel like a beautiful kind of torture. A civil war of faith. Sometimes, in my lowest moments, a dark thought hijacks my brain. Did God make a mistake? My entire belief system screams NO. God is supposed to be all-powerful, all-knowing, the ultimate developer who is present everywhere at the same time and doesn't create glitches. But my heart, my grieving, angry heart, whispers the terrifying question: did he make a mistake with taking Grace? The thought is an ice-cold shock to my system. It feels like a betrayal of everything that I know, and yet I can't entirely shut it down. I'm stuck in this brutal civil war between my faith and my pain. Nevertheless, occasionally, during the middle of that war, I received a flicker of a different signal. Maybe it's not about a mistake. Maybe it's about a purpose so huge that my human brain could not even download the details. At this juncture, this is where I have to park my doubts. I must trust that one day, when I'm finally on the other side, I'll get to stand before God, and then all the broken pieces will snap into place. The ultimate spoiler, the full explanation. Every why will finally have its answer. Until the face to face. Until I get that ultimate face to face with God, I'm not just carrying the memory of Grace, I'm carrying her legacy. I'm talking about the hilarious inside jokes, the life lessons she dropped like wisdom bombs, and the unconditional love that's now a permanent part of my operating system. Will I ache for her? Absolutely. It's a dull ache that never entirely goes away. But I'm done with letting the shadow of her absence dim the light that she brought. I'm choosing to celebrate her loudly. I'm documenting this piece right now, Friday, December 6th, 2024, at 7:10 a.m., not just event, but as proof. Proof of the unbreakable bond she coded into my soul. When I get to the other side, I'll feel it vibrating through me on the universe's frequency. Until then, I'm holding on to hope. Not as a weak little flame, but as a spotlight, cutting through the darkness and guiding me forward. Our game isn't over. I'm just playing the next level for both of us. The house Grace never lived in. Grace was a master of self-control. Every dollar had a purpose, and every purchase was planned months, sometimes even years, in advance. While others splurged, she saved. Her goal was crystal clear: to own her own home. She skipped the fancy clothes, passed on new shoes, and said no to nights out, all channeling her money into that single, powerful dream. However, she did allow herself one luxury: family. She saved carefully for trips to visit our mom's siblings in St. Thomas, St. Croix, and Miami. Those journeys were her only windows to the world beyond her savings account. Beyond that, every extra penny was meant for a brick in the foundation of her future dream house. And she did it. She worked, she sacrificed, and she finally saved enough to buy the land. It was her victory, the reward for all those years of saying no. She was preparing to build her permanent earthly home where she and her family could grow old together. But in a cruel twist of fate, she never got to see the house built. She never got to live in the home that she had deprived herself of so much to have. Her story left me with a powerful lesson. While saving for a rainy day is smart, only saving for a rainy day means you might never get to enjoy the sunshine. I believe in balance. Save for the secure future, but also spend on the unforgettable present. Make the memories now. Because you can't take the house with you, but the memories of a life well lived, those last forever. I just wish Grace had allowed herself to enjoy more of the journey. Chapter 18, Proving Grace Wrong. I often wish Grace had lived long enough to see what became of me. I wish she could see that the path she worried about was the very one that led to my purpose. I still remember her voice, firm and full of concern, urging me to find a real job. I had just walked away from my position at Key Universal, my first job, immediately after leaving high school, to open a preschool. It felt like a calling. On the contrary, to Grace, it must have seemed like a risk that she could not fathom. Week after week, she told me to go work in a store, get something steady. She wasn't wrong to worry, but I wasn't wrong to dream either. Ever since I was 4 years old, I knew I wanted to teach, not sell, not manage, but teach and help others learn. However, the day after my high school graduation, when my friends and I received jobs at Key Universal, it felt like a beginning. Inevitably, 2 years later, I walked away. I had to try to do what I felt led to. Unfortunately, the first 2 years of running my preschool were brutal. Most parents could not afford to pay, or they simply refused to pay. Every week came a new promise, a new story. Still, the results were virtually the same, an empty till and an emptier feeling of doubt. Grace's words echoed in my mind. Was she right? Had I made a mistake? However, here's what Grace did not consider. While she had excelled in high school and passed all her exams with ease, I did not. Contrary to her success, my grades were not good enough, not even to qualify me to be a teacher in the traditional way. Consequently, I did it my way. How did I persevere? I furthered my education, slowly climbing from an early childhood educator to a qualified high school and university instructor. Grace did not see all this coming. Oh, how I just wish that Grace could have seen that not all victories happen on the expected timeline. Sometimes the rocky path is the one that leads you exactly where you are meant to be. The secret war of the hospital nurses. My sister, Grace, wasn't just a nurse working on the surgical ward at the hospital when she passed away. She was a soldier in a secret war, and she knew the battlefield better than anyone, including the dangers that lurked in the operating room. But the real danger wasn't always the surgery itself. It was the system. In those days, some surgical doctors didn't see nurses as medical professionals. They treated them like glorified maids or their personal servants in a life or death environment. In addition to saving lives, nurses also performed many menial duties. Imagine this. At the end of each week, after surgical procedures, junior nurses had to scrub the doctor's bloody shoes with their bare hands, wash hand towels, clean patients' bedside tables, lockers, and the nurse's station. And perhaps most shockingly of all, they had to clean the mucky, pus-soaked bandages ripped from patients' wounds, including ulcers, with their bare hands, so that they could be reused. This was the hidden cost of healthcare. This is what nurses like my sister Grace tolerated to keep the hospital running. They were the backbone of the wards, doing the brutal, unseen work that no one ever talks about. But how long can a backbone bend before it risks breaking? According to my sister Grace, this is what happened at the hospital while she was working there as a nurse in the 1980s. The missing needle. It started as a quiet weekend. My youngest sister, when she was about 12 years old, was sitting on her bed, sewing doll clothes. For a moment, she stuck the needle into the mattress and stretched her foot before she got out of bed. The needle pricked her sharply beneath her ankle. When she reached the floor, she felt a sharp prickling pain each time she made a step. Her blood ran cold. She found half of the needle. Half the needle was gone. We tore the room apart, frantically searching for the missing piece. It had simply vanished. A chilling thought struck me. Debbie, I said, my voice tight, if we can't find the other half of the needle, it must be in your foot. I rushed her to the hospital. An X-ray confirmed our worst fear. Half of the needle was lodged deep in her foot. Surgery was scheduled for Tuesday. We were relieved. My sister Grace was a nurse on that very surgical ward. We trusted she was in good hands. After the operation, the surgeons came out empty-handed. They hadn't found it. They instructed her to return for surgery on Thursday when they X-rayed her foot again. The ghostly image confirmed the needle was still there, hiding in her flesh, but it had moved to a different location. This time, they had painfully inserted a few needles in her foot, without any form of anesthesia, to help mark the location before the X-ray. The system had failed the first time. Now, they were going to put my sister to sleep again to cut into her foot for a second time. We chose not to tell our mom, who was in Virgin Gorda. There was no need to panic her from afar. Grace felt that this was our battle to fight. So, on Thursday, I took Debbie back to the hospital for her second surgery, a second attempt to find what they should have found the first time. When she woke up from the anesthesia, the first thing she noticed was her surroundings. Instead of being in the children's ward with colorful walls and other kids, she was surrounded by the elderly and adult patients on the surgical ward. She was a child, newly turned 12, but still in primary school, left to recover in a room full of strangers. It was a small, but deeply telling oversight by the hospital. But the next day, something powerful happened. She didn't leave in a wheelchair or with a fuss. She remembered walking home, side by side with our sister Grace, the nurse in her crisp, white uniform. That walk home wasn't just a discharge, it was a statement. With Grace by her side, a professional in the very system that had failed her twice, Debbie didn't feel like a victim. She felt a surge of pride. Her big sister wasn't just a nurse. She was a protector, a guide who led her out of that sterile, impersonal place and back into the world. It was a quiet triumph, a small but unforgettable act of defiance. But this was just the beginning. The real question was, what would happen when the system failed someone who didn't have a nurse for a sister? Chapter 19, The Name. My late sister Grace had a gift for names. This magical talent made her the secret weapon for many new mothers in the Federation of St. Kitts and Nevis. She always had the perfect name ready, as if she could see the child's future. But Grace died in childbirth, never getting to hold her own baby or whisper the beautiful name she had already chosen. The Whispered Secret. The whispers started almost immediately after my sister Grace died. They slithered through our village and town, just loud enough to hear. How could this happen to a nurse? People would ask on street corners. She knew how to take care of herself, and she did. But one whisper was sharper and colder than the others. It was a rumor about another woman, a woman who had died just days before my sister, in the very same hospital, during the very same kind of surgery, a cesarean section. That's when the questions in my mind began to scream. My sister was the healthiest person I knew. She was a health-conscious nurse who ate right, exercised, and took care of her body. Her only struggle was with dysmenorrhea, so severe on the first day of her cycle that she'd be doubled over in pain, sometimes even vomiting. But that wasn't supposed to be fatal. That wasn't supposed to steal her life during a routine surgery. So, when someone recently asked me the one question that has haunted me for years, why was there no autopsy? My blood ran cold. I remember it clearly. In the fog of our grief, I begged our family. We need to ask for an autopsy. We need to know why. But the answer from some of the elders in our church was a quiet, firm wall. No, it is the Lord's will. We must not question it. And so we never did. The official story was closed. But the whispers never died. What if her death wasn't an act of God, but a terrible mistake? What if the truth about what happened to my sister, and maybe to that other woman, is still buried in that hospital, a secret waiting to be uncovered? The funeral that confessed everything. My sister's funeral wasn't just a funeral. It was a silent confession. The church was overflowing, but not just with the usual friends and family. It was packed with doctors and nurses. I'm not talking about a few respectful colleagues. I mean, every well-known doctor in the Federation was there. The air wasn't just thick with grief. It was heavy with a shocking, unspoken guilt. And then I saw it, tears streaming down the faces of seasoned doctors. These weren't just tears of sadness. They were tears of a terrible, shared secret. The pieces of a horrifying puzzle began to click into place. Whispers confirmed what their tears betrayed. A catastrophic mistake had been made during her surgery. But the most chilling part? Grace knew. She knew the hospital was failing. She knew she wasn't the first mother to die during a breech C-section that year. In fact, she had told a few of her closest nurse friends something that now sounds like a horrifying prophecy. If I have to get a cesarean section today, it means that I won't make it. She knew the facility wasn't competent. She knew the risks better than anyone. So, her funeral became something else entirely. It was the one place the doctors couldn't hide. Some people believe that their collective presence, their stunned silence, their tears, it was all a silent admission of a truth they would never say out loud. It was alleged that many people believed that they killed her. And every single one of them came to her funeral to say they were sorry. However, this was just speculation. The one question no one will answer. Let me be clear, I don't hold hate in my heart for the doctors and nurses who were there that day. Even with the whispers, the alleged cover-ups, the silence, my heart isn't filled with anger. It's filled with a single, burning question. Why? Think about it. When someone is shot, even in a gang-related incident, what's the first thing the authorities do? They demand an autopsy. It's standard. It's justice. It's the truth. But my sister? Grace didn't die in a shadowy alley. She died in the bright, sterile light of the hospital on August 1st, 1991. She died in the presence of medical professionals. For them, the need for an autopsy, the need for the truth simply vanished. Why? If they had nothing to hide, why was her death treated differently? What were they so afraid an autopsy would reveal? The cover-up isn't just in what they did that day. It's in the silence that followed. And I'm not angry. I'm just determined to finally hear what that silence is screaming. The prophecy and the overdose. Grace didn't just have a feeling. She had a nurse's cold, hard certainty. She knew the facility wasn't competent to handle her case. But what makes this even more shocking were the facts that she couldn't control. She was 2 weeks overdue. The baby was breech. Any medical professional knows that combination is a high-risk alarm bell. The doctors had a window days, even weeks, to act. They could have scheduled a safer procedure. They should have done something. But they waited. And that wait looks less like a mistake and more like sheer negligence. Then, there are the words that have haunted me for decades. The doctor's own confession to me meant to explain the chaos. We were having trouble putting her to sleep. Trouble putting her to sleep. Think about what that really means. In a rush to start a delayed surgery, could they have administered too much anesthesia? Could a simple, desperate attempt to sedate her have become a fatal overdose? How could this happen to a nurse, one of their own? The question isn't just about grief. It's about justice. Did the very hospital she dedicated her life to fail her, cover it up, and then hide behind a wall of silence? The evidence points to a terrifying yes, but the truth is still waiting to be uncovered. The final, chilling question. So, here is the terrifying truth that her death exposed. If a loyal, dedicated, and faithful nurse, someone who knew the system's secrets from the inside out, could not trust it to save her own life, how could anyone else? Grace dedicated her life to healing others within the hospital's walls. Those very hospital walls. She knew the protocols, the staff, the dangers. And yet, the system she served failed her in the most final way possible. This isn't just a tragedy. It's a warning. It makes you wonder, is the system there to protect us, or is it just a fragile mask? If it can betray one of its own, what does that mean for everyone else?